Hello, hello, hello. How are we all doing? How are we all doing? Hello. Hello, everyone. Right then. Hello, Peter Dawson. Hello, Jack Ray. Hello, John Shea. Hello, Baron Newman. Hello, Atris Verdun. Hello, Calvin Gersberg. Hello, Michael Cooch. Hello, Dunrick Ironhammer. Hello, Stephen Richards. Hello, Friendly Sea Mine. First time I think I've seen you, so hello. Usually when I see sea mines, I want to hide, but today I'm gonna try and stay visible. Hello, Dan Freeman. I'm a little gunboat, short and stout, and here's my huge 6-inch gun. Oh, Paul, where'd you go? I'm off today, cleaning house and watching UHF. Fun. Hello, Bijan. I'm not much online on these gunboats. A few fuzzy photos and small write-ups on Wikipedia. Sending Gunboat by Douglas Riemann seems based on these interwar ships. To an extent. Hello, Zusky. Hello, DG40. Hello, Donner Garnhammer. Hello, John Luke. Hello, John Sykes. So, Dragonfly class and other gunboats servicing World War II. So, I am taking gunboats to the full. I'm also going to say again, for those who don't realise, because they haven't watched they don't watch the long patrols, that thank you to whoever did send this to me. I had strong suspicions about who it was, but it turns out it wasn't them. And this is what Sunday's Brew Ships is going to be. It's going to be me building this. Which should be fun. And don't worry, I do have a second camera. So basically there'll be a camera looking to me, and I'll be talking through that. And I will show it at some points through in that way. But there will also be another camera positioned to my right, watching it. Hello, everyone. Also today, there are a few books which have been used. There's, of course, been this boat. This one. Because I'm doing other gunboats in service, and so you can't really... Let's put it this way. You can't really do gunboats in World War II without mentioning dogboats. They have also been used. Shall I get them all down? Because I've been doing research in this for a while. Because someone kept asking me about the Dragonfly class, and I kept going, I will do them, I will do them, I will do them. Yeah, go on. So, right. Just check my butt doesn't look big enough. No. Alright, so we have volume somewhere around here. We have volume 1. Where is it? There we go. That's British submarines in the Cold War. This is the problem of having double stacked shelves, especially when you have lots of books in the same series by the same gentleman. The books get similar covers. Wouldn't help anyone if they just made them slightly different in the covers. You know, would it? Would it help some of us? Yes, it would. It would help some of us a great deal. Especially when we're finding books which we... Oh, there they are! Together! Ouch! That banged my head. Oh. Oh, good lord. I'm now remembering the fact that last time I got this out, there was more space underneath here because it wasn't weighed down. You're just a millimetre too tall, aren't you, friend? Just a millimetre too tall. Ah. Shift them. Do that. And E. Oh. there we go. It's a millimetre tool. Allied coastal forces, World War II. And there was a Dunkirk battle down here, I swear. It's disappeared on me now. I'm sure I saw it down here. Have I lost it when I banged my head? No. I don't know. Ah, yeah. Right. But no, they'll do. They'll do. The books to recommend for this video, they will do. We have Allied Coastal Forces of World War II, Fairmile designs and US submarine chasers, and dogboats. And also several good books on Dunkirk, which are able to be found. And of course, the other book that was very useful in this was, of course, the Royal Navy China Station, 1864 to 1941. The massive text which has all sorts of things that ships get up to. Ooh. Let's put you guys back quickly so that I don't have to deal with you all later. And I know roughly where you go. It's always easier to put you back while I know roughly where you go. Which is a surprise that it's easier to put books back when you know roughly where they go in the book pile. Surprising, really. Very much. Right, keep those out. Right. Hi, Steve Clarke. Hello, Tanavelka. Hello, Donrick Ironhammer. How to Scary. You need a book map. I need it. I come in and only see you behind. Oh, good lord. Thank you. Well, I always, in the nicest way, my entire family are blessed with large Glutamus Maximuses. We are blessed with Maximus Glutamus Maximus. No one will ever say. Yeah, I always remember there was a TV program where one of the people on it was complaining they had no behind. In my family, that's physically impossible to complain. Thanks largely to my mum's side of the family. Barnium, when did welding replace riveting as the main construction method on warships? 1930s probably, but it's still in use through World War II because it's good for repairs. So riveting is one of those things that hangs around because it's useful and because you need to develop a lot more techniques than just how to build a ship with welding before welding can become the major thing for everything. And really, it sort of depends on the Navy when exactly in the 1930s they transition over. The Royal Navy gets there to an extent earlier. And let me please explain that why. The US Navy does more investment in it and has more ideas on it, but they're not really building their generation of ships, which are going to be the first majorly welded ships, as early as the Royal Navy do, because the Royal Navy butt up against the treaty limitations far earlier. And I'm talking, of course, about the illustrious class aircraft carriers, where they used every trick in the book they could to keep their weight down, so they could put in as much armour as they could. That is good stuff. May I recommend the Ducey decimal system? Nah. I have it organised on the I am not using as much, I'm not using that much at all, and I need immediate reference. For example, every time someone says things like, the British economy was bankrupt after World War I, I produce my British Historical Statistics by B.R. Mitchell, and go, show me where in here it is bankrupt after World War I. World War II, you are correct. But after World War II, before World War II, there's also the Great Depression. So, you know, that's what happens. It's also when someone says to me things like, ah, yes, well, you know, Germany was out producing Britain in steel, in iron and steel before World War I. They were, but not in the high-grade iron and steel. It's one of the things, it's like China today dominates the world steel market. Everyone keeps talking about how much China dominates the world steel market. The vast majority of steel they produce is the low-grade stuff, which goes into all sorts of things and you really do need, but it's the stuff which is produced with the lowest margins on profit of any of them. And they dominate that area, which is why they produce so much steel. But then when you're looking for steel which is going into very, very high-tech requirements of steel, i.e. ship steel, warship steel, you're looking at Britain, Sweden, you're looking at America, you're looking at Japan, because they're where they come from. China produces just about enough for themselves. Your findings of me, you've forgotten the category of, oh bother, my mother has stolen it. Yeah, that happens far too often. But there are payoffs. Like today, I got 2 Ferrero Rocher milkshakes because she made a mistake while ordering. So, you know, maybe she nicks books, but she orders double milkshakes. I got the China Station book. It had a lot of ants in it. Not ant-class gunboats, but actually ants. The packaging was tasty to them, apparently. Still have dead ants falling out of it. I don't know how that happened. Then, 1 4-inch, 1 12-pounder, 1 6-pounder, 1 3-pounder, 1 2-pounder, and 4 to 5 machine guns. Just look at Spectre Dragonfly class on Wikipedia. I'm suspicious. The claim is a complement of 22 and armed of... They had a complement of roughly 74 in wartime. But in peacetime, possibly did have a complement of roughly 22 wandering around. But usually it's, you know, 70-ish. Conan the Librarian should quest here. Yes. Or there's the other section of books which are still in my bedroom, which is still full. Because you remember all the shelvings I had in my bedroom, they're shown in the earlier videos. They're still full of books. And then there's the boxes of books I still have in the attic and in the garage. Because before COVID, I condensed pretty much... Because everyone was home and everything, I condensed the books I had at the 2 places which I was sort of living out of semi-permanently because I was wandering around teaching and all the other things. And yeah, so I condensed probably 3 loads of books down to 1 space. Yeah. Dear Chairman, been watching old Defence Committee sessions of old military officials. My word, it's farcical. Makes me even more concerned with the state of our military leadership, particularly in the procurement. Procurement is an issue. Procurement is an issue. But that's Bilge Pump's issue. Oh, no. There are books I've lent to Drac that he's supposed to return to me. There are books which I'm waiting to come back, but They are loaned in exchange for Iron Brew. We exchange books between us sometimes. Mm-hmm. 22 for ship crew, including gunners, because I'm getting 74 for crew. So where are you finding 22 for crew? I'm missing something. So why don't we use river gunboats today? 96831. Do not worry, my friend. I will get into that. But basically, it comes down to something which goes, well. "114 was out yesterday. Episode 114 for Burroughts was out yesterday. So, gunboats. Right then. Gunboat is usually described as a small undecked vessel carrying a single smoothbore cannon in the bow, or just 2 to 3 such cannons, in the pre-steam area. But really, they were usually 1 or 2 masts, and they could be oar-powered. But if you consider the battles that took place on the Great Lakes, where they were fairly common, they were usually single-masted and carried a couple of cannon. And some swivel guns on the railings. Then again, you might need an honorary display shelf for your own books. That could possibly be useful, because currently I can't find my own book. It's somewhere in here. My book is in here somewhere. He says. It's in here somewhere, but I can't currently find my own book. I was looking for it today and going, hang on, where is it? My mum hasn't nicked that one because she's got her own copy. Okay? So, somewhere around here, I do have my own book. My own copy of my own book. But I'm not sure where it is at the moment. Now, as things go on, gunboats change. In the steam era, gunboats are usually paddle vessels. For example, during the rebellions of 1837, the British deployed wooden paddle gunboats in the lower Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River. Basically there, just to make the point, because the most dangerous thing in Canada is always the Canadians. It's always the Canadians. And as the Americans found this out on a regular basis when they tried to invade Canada. And please note, they did try and invade Canada earlier than the War of 1812. They did try it in the Revolutionary War as well. And it didn't really go well. I don't know who donated that Belfast. Sadly. I'm just saying, broad speaking, thank you. Britain built a lot of gunboats in the 1850s, which were used for the Crimean War. Why again are they building them? Because in Crimea, they want fire support to get close. So that's the start. So that's the starting point of our period's gunboats. They are about fire support. They're about getting fire support close to shore. They're about getting fire support up rivers. And the British sort of keep having these gunboats around as part of their larger fleet for coastal facilities and coastal operations and riverine operations. And then the American Civil War happens and gunboats become all the rage. They are really considered very high grade. And unfortunately for America and for the rest of the world is at this point it's the Americans are building all these really cool gunboats at the same time as the British gunboats from the Crimean War are wearing out. And these new gunboats the British built were an iron teak composite. And so by the latter part of the 19th century and early 20th century, gunboat is the common name for smaller vessels which can have many classifications. They can be called river gunboats, river monitors, coastal defence gunboats. For example, the Panther of the Kaiserlich Marine was a coastal defence gunboat, and fully fledged monitors. And what we mean by fully fledged monitors is something along the lines of monitor itself and the things which came after it. Britain itself actually liked to build some very interesting Rendell or flat iron gunboats for coastal defence, and they continued often. They were some of the last vessels to carry a full sailing rig. For example, if you want to go see one of the gunboats built in the late sort of 19th century, HMS Gannet, which was built in 1878, of course classified as a screw sloop of war, but it spends most of life being used as a gunboat. And there is a real symmetry between sloops and gunboats. Okay, sloops they often use as gunboats and often function as gunboats. The difference between a sloop and a gunboat, as a rule, especially by the time you get to the early 20th century, is a sloop is designed for oceanic work, whereas a gunboat is really not. For example, witness this low freeboard. It's HMS Belfast. It's the Corgi version. I'm not sure where the bright light that's shining off it's coming from. I think it must be the screen, but let me just check. Yeah. It's the screen. Oh. I'm not sure where that light coming off it is. Yes, brew ships on Sunday will have me building her. Yes, well, I was late today as well. The Mark Artness, don't worry, because Poodle and Corgi walking duties come first as well. Because if they don't, I might not be here for to do the live. Now, Fisher was really not keen on gunboats and gets rid of a lot of them. However, interesting enough, there is a class of gunboat, a gunboat sort of sloop, which lasts quite a while. The Bramble class. And they even survive Fisher's reforms. And they enter service in 1899, 1900 and 1901, and they're being in service till 1925, 1920. And the reason they're still in service is because of where they're used. They're used in hot climates. They wander up rivers. West Africa, Yangtze. That is where they go. And of course, this famously, the insect class. Now, the insect class, along with the flyer class, are built for many reasons in World War I, but basically their main purpose in life, shortly after World War I is over, becomes, hello, we're on the Yangtze River, we're going far inland. Why? Because the Yangtze River is massive. Also, China really starting to fall apart at this point. And you need to be able to take firepower with you, and you need to be able to give presents. And also, the other advantage of these ships is they turn up. They have armed personnel aboard, they have a nice safe space you can evacuate people onto, and things, if you need to get things on them, and they have enough firepower they can make the point. And when you're dealing with a scenario where you're basically operating in a failed state, and it's terrible to use that terminology to China in that period today, because that's the terminology we'd use, because that's the closest description we have to what it was like, but it wasn't a failed state in real terms. It's a very complicated scenario. you've got lots of different states competing for who is going to be the state, rather than necessarily a failed state. And the trouble is, each of these different warlords and power bases wanted to have the power of a nation state and wanted to act like a nation state, but didn't necessarily have the ability to do so. And on top of that, you had outside influences getting involved and mucking around and trying to be powerful. Now, did torpedo boats evolve from gunboats? They certainly have a similar background, because it does start off with torpedo gunboats. Suddenly the world turned iron brew orange. No, I don't think you can see through the iron brew orange, actually. It'd be quite cool if you could. I would love to do a whole video through an iron brew filter. I just think you'd all enjoy it so much. Brand new, the first the vessel to launch a torpedo was the Austro-Hungarian SMS Seehund, a gunboat. So yes, TVs evolved from a torpedo gunboat. And of course we do have gunboat diplomacy, which is most famously written about by James Cable. His book is... there. Where is it there? I've got two cables up there, and they're both black. Was one with that one or that one? Hey! I might possibly, and at some point, should I get enough books? People often tell me sort of, okay, you grow your YouTube channel to a certain point, then you start employing people to assist. And everyone goes, right, and the first person you need is a video editor or something like that. No. The first person something I need is a part-time librarian to help me with my books. I have a friend who would actually do that. She's one of the librarians I work with at uni. Paul Freer, US gunboats went up and down rivers during the US Civil War, dominating landscape and enslavers. Yeah. I skipped through some of the US gunboats because we are starting off with Dragonfly class and they are British gunboats. So I was trying to give their history of where the Dragonflies come from. US gunboats are sort of a different thing. It's almost... Here is the thing about the gunboats, and we'll be getting into this. Because US gunboats in World War II are so horrendously badly designed. They really are, for their jobs. And I have this sinking suspicion it's because the US Navy is very scared of becoming a... That's going to terrify all of you if it keeps shining back on you like that the whole time. I'm not sure where that light is coming from. I think it must be the screen is reflecting back off that. But no. I'll do that, then my head will block it. Now, this of course is a US gunboat. This is the Panay, which is famous for the Panay incident. And a few other things. Now, she is a riverine gunboat. Yes, a river gunboat. And river gunboats are... well, they're special. They really are. The Yangtze River is one of those areas in the world where there is a constant presence. The Royal Navy usually had roughly 15 ships assigned to the Chinese waters. What is interesting to note, and something which is worthwhile remembering, is there is another reason why I would argue the British and the Americans were ever unlikely to have a conflict in terms of war was because they kept talking to each other. And one of the reasons they kept talking to each other is when you look at the Yangtze River patrols of America and Britain, they basically operate almost as one navy. Let me explain. The Panay incident is a beautiful illustration of this. The first vessels to arrive when Panay is hit in the Panay incident are Ladybird and Bee, which are two British insect class patrol gunboats. And this is the point. The U.S. Navy gets in trouble. They don't have any other vessels nearby. The Royal Navy doesn't hesitate to go into a zone where the Japanese are still attacking and the Japanese are still fighting. Their own ships come to attack, but the US Navy's in trouble. They go to their aid. And there are other incidents where the Royal Navy's in trouble and the US Navy come to our aid. Now, the Panay herself, oh, she's a cool vessel. She really is. She's built for duty on the Yangtze River. And her entire purpose is going up and down that river, looking after US shipping, looking after US nationals, and protecting other foreign citizens when they needed to. And the US Navy has quite a force. You know, they keep quite a viable force sitting on the Yangtze River Patrol. They had 6 vessels assigned to it from about 1928. They put 6 brand new ones, but they just formally established the Yangtze Patrol in 1922. And the US were keen on their presence. They were keen on their presence in the Yangtze River because, again, if you wanted to trade in those areas, you needed it to be safe. And you couldn't make it safe if you didn't have something to go up and down the river and make sure it was safe. Although, not quite sure how in 1945 the US Navy decided to use USS Nashville and USS St. Louis to continue the Yangtze Patrol. Because, I don't know about you, but to me, Brooklyn-class light cruisers, for all their very good purposes, I agree, a Brooklyn-class light cruiser is a very useful ship. Does not scream river gunboat patrol to me. I'm not sure. Perhaps someone in chat will correct me, but does anyone think light cruiser screams river gunboat patrol? HMS Amethyst was a sloop, which was being used on gunboat duty. Well, Panay is, you know, we go through her various weapon systems. She was armed with 2 3-inch 50s, 8 single 30 cal machine guns. Yeah. The direct count depends on the river size. 5570. Light cruiser, river gunboat. Well, it's a big river, maybe. USS Monarchy, Civil War, iron hull, double-ended side wheel gunboat, served on China Station until 1903. Yep. And didn't the RN use HMS London to support HMS Amethyst and rescue the ship's CAD of HMS Amethyst? I think they also rescued the rest of the ship, but we all know why they went. Yes. I'm not saying it's completely unprecedented, but as a rule, they're a special movement. They're not actually sent in. Matthew Luster, would monitors ultimately replace the use of river gunboats during the World Wars? No, actually, the gunboats replace monitors. In terms of what the ships are called. Monitors are a form of gunboat. But it's, to be fair, what tends to win out is sloops are used in their gunboat role, in their sort of diplomatic role, and motor gunboats become involved. If we're in the Lower Amazon, can we have the US Iowa as a river gunboat? Theoretically, but you shouldn't have a gunboat that you cannot maneuver in river waters, and something which you have to reverse out of the river is probably not a sensible thing to take in there. Don't worry around. Naval, Warspite 4 she could cosplay as a gunboat for the Narvik Giant. Yes, but that's also Warspite, and Warspite often thinks she's a gunboat. She thinks she's many things. Portugal, if the Britons went to war over Jenkins' ear, they'd probably drop A-bombs for a ship's cat. No, we would do something far worse than drop A-bombs. No. We have something far scarier than nuclear weapons to drop on you if you attack an animal. It's called the RSPCA. You see, a bomb merely takes you from this life. The RSPCA, suitably motivated, will ensure that you will not enjoy the rest of this life, the next life, or the life after that. And they will keep going. They do not understand the words stop or moderation once animals are involved. That's good. I'm pretty sure the Iowa could maneuver in Lower Amazon. It's about 10 miles wide. How wide, though, is the bit which is deep enough for the Iowa to maneuver in? That's the question. And also, you have to remember, Lower Amazon, if I remember correctly, they have mud flats and sand and banks underneath the river, which actually do move. So it's not exactly the most viable waters to go through. Michael Gooch, why did they use sloops as gunboats? Wouldn't a flag class have a lesser draft and be more handy in confined waters? Probably, but they were basically selling off the flag class as fast as they could because they made good merchant ships, whereas the sloops didn't. So they could get a good price for a flag class. Isn't it possible they felt the range of the guns and the use of small boats would cover the area of a gunboat or two could cover? I think more likely it was the Americans turning up after being forced out by the Japanese. They were announcing they were back. And they were announcing they were back in style. You send in your Brooklyn class, everyone knows you're there. And river gunboats are a critical thing. One interesting thing to note about the Panay incident, while we're on Panay and talking about it, is that the Japanese excuse for why they hit the Panay was that the American flag looked very similar to the Chinese flag at the time. And for anyone who doesn't know it, the Chinese flag at the time was a white star, a single multi-headed sun with its sort of different blades coming out of it, on a sort of blue quarter on a red field. Whereas, of course, the American flag is many stars on a blue background with red and white stripes. It sounds tenuous at best. But there again, you are talking about visual identification from the air, which is always tenuous at best. Windows 5570. The Amazon can handle the big ships, though. The company I work with took a heavy lift ship up the Amazon and through Brazil to drop cargo off in Peru. Yeah, but that's a heavy lift ship might not have the same draft. If I remember correctly, heavy lift ships also have variable drafts and are able to pump out and pump up tanks, if it's the type of heavy lift ship I'm thinking of. So yeah, that can go up shallower waters than an Iowa class can. Traditionally, before World War II, the USN and Iowa class always had an armor cruiser, then heavy cruiser, anchored as flagship at Shanghai. Probably what motivated Brooklyn class post-war. Yep. They didn't just send one though; they sent two. When you send in two Brooklyn class, you're making more of a point. What's interesting is they had the patrol in 1928 has boats of 3 different sizes procured from them. The Guam and Tutilia, 380 tons and a crew of 60, were able to ply the entire river year round. Panay and Oahu, 450 tons and a complement of 65 men, and Luzon, 560 tons and 82 men, were May-September gunboats, able to patrol completely up the river only during high water months. And Luzon and Mindanao, which was Luzon's sister, served on the Chinese coast, not in the river patrol. Newer ships also managed to serve in China until late 1941. Kind of surprised they didn't bring in a flotilla of landing craft infantry gunboats that were using the Pacific to add to the effect the Brooklyns would have. I'd have said more landing vehicle tracked LVTs with their various weapons would be more fun, but we'll leave that to one side. So, Dragonfly class. Well, these vessels come about in 1937. They come about because the Royal Navy realizes well, to be polite, the insect class are starting to get old and they need something slightly bigger, something slightly more powerful. They're 585 long tons, that's 594 tons. They have 3,800 shaft horsepower, so really not the heaviest, most powerful system. And that comes from 2 geared steam turbines driving 2 shafts, but supplied by 2 Admiralty type boilers. Their top speed was 17 knots. And believe it or not, I don't think that's 17 knots on the open ocean. Complement 74 with 2 4-inch 100mm guns on single 40-degree mountings, which meant they could go up to 40 degrees. They couldn't therefore be used for AA. A 3.7-inch Mark V howitzer and 8 machine guns. 75%. It was Happy Dragon from Big Lift. Fully loaded, it's 18,000 tons, 7-meter draft. But yes, every cargo ship has variable draft. Otherwise, you can't move cargo. Yeah. Whereas Iowa, if I'm not mistaken, the Iowa class's draft is 11.3 3 meters fully loaded, 11.5 meters maximum, and can be 11.9 meters aft, 11.9 meters forward on New Jersey in 1968, while 12.5 meters aft. So, yeah, there's a slight difference between an Iowa class and even the big Happy Dragon. Now, these ships had an interesting career. And now I'm really wishing I hadn't put my China book back. Ay, caramba. And I'm going to put in a link below on this video in the description that you might want to go and to read, because I'll just stick that in there. These ships could be quite a lot of fun to operate, but they do not come from an easy place. So, thank you out to you come, because I'll need you for Dunkirk, because you'll provide the best sources for that when we talk about Dunkirk in a second. And I need you back out. Yeah. Hey. Oh. I need to start getting back to the gym, but that means I need to get a curl sorted. Yeah, well. So, 1937. No, that's Lockharn Noble. (1937) when they arrive. Well, where is the quote I found in here? This is the problem with when a piece of paper falls out. (1937) is a very, very long section in this particular part. No, there it is. That one? Or is that one? This always looks disorganized, but it isn't. Please do apologize. It's not disorganized. It's making sure I get the right quote, because there are about 3 quotes which are rather similar in here. And I had them all noted for different points, as being ones to talk about. In the Yangtze, at a safe anchorage near the blockhead buoy, some 6 miles below Wusong, therefore some 20 miles from Shanghai itself, all the refugees embarked from the destroyers Duncan, Captain Harold Hickling, as captain destroyers, 8th Destroyer Flotilla, Delight, Commander J.R.N. Taylor, and Duchess, Lieutenant Commander W.T.W. Curtis, each 1,375 tons, who had brought them all the way all down river to Empress of Asia. These destroyers then embarked the troop reinforcements of passage back up to Shanghai. Subsequently, Captain Gould was able to state by 7 p.m. at August 21st, we had every man, woman, and child safe ashore at Hong Kong. These passengers included one boy born at sea during the voyage south and christened on board, Michael Asia Rowland. all the while they were doing this, it was gunboats like the Dragonflies and the Dragonfly class and the Insects, which were on patrol in Shanghai. So while the destroyers were doing the evacuation, it was the gunboats which were maintaining the presence. And as one American lieutenant serving on the Mindanao, their patrol river number 8, wrote, "Not yet sunup. The Japanese bombers were between us and the bright sky and east. There were 9 of them, wheeling around in perfect formation about 10,000 feet. We could hear a great sustained roar like the sound of the surf as the Chinese in the city charged around the streets in panic. Sampans by the thousand cut their moorings and drifted down on the American gunboat, hoping it would not be a target. Chinese air batteries, meanwhile, filling the sky with pretty pink puffs of smoke that were nowhere near the planes." It was not a fun experience to be in. At this point, Rear Admiral Yangtze, a Reginald V. Holt, accompanied by his staff, arrived at Hong Kong in November 1937 on the P&O liner, the SS Rajapuntana. From Victoria Harbour, the small party took passage to Wusong in the heavy cruiser Dorchester, and then Captain Francis Reginald Barry, arriving at 09:32 hours on the 16th of November. They were then disembarked to a tug and were taken further upstream towards Shanghai, where their patrol boats were based. So one of the things you have to remember is that you have the Yangtze station and you have the China station. The China station gets some of the information about the Yangtze station, but the Yangtze station book, and there is apparently one somewhere like this, I have not yet managed to find a copy of. Right, to the 1st of June 1940. It's 1941. I stopped perfectly at the 1st of June 1941. Terrible. On the 5th day of Operation Dynamo, 64,429 troops are evacuated. Sunk as a result of heavy German air attacks are the flotilla leader Keith, flagship Rear Admiral Wake Walker, the destroyers Basilic, Havant, Fordrant, which was a French one, and the minesweeper Skipjack. The gunboat Mosquito and transports British Queen, 807 tons, Scotia, 3,454 tons, with French troops aboard. There are heavy losses of personnel in a sortie against Dunkirk. S-34, Lieutenant Obermeyer, sinks the British trawlers Argyllshire and Stella Dorado. The destroyers Ivanhoe, Venomous, Vimy, Vivacious, and Whitehall, and the sloops Bideford and Kingfisher are damaged also in air attacks. Now, we don't actually have any pictures of Mosquito, which is rather sad. We have pictures of Grasshopper and Locust, but no pictures of Mosquito. The point is, these ships are going everywhere they can be and plugging in holes. Mosquito is supposed to be deployed to the Far East, but of course World War II breaks out, so she, along with others and sisters, start assisting British coastal forces that are in the UK. They assist the coastal forces. Why? Because they're shallow draft vessels and they're expected to do what predecessor gunboats did in Belgium in 1914, and provide support to the troops ashore for the coastal operations. She takes part in Dunkirk pretty much every day, but remember the point I made earlier about her having only 3,000 odd horsepower. Let's be precise. 3,800 shaft horsepower. 3,800 shaft horsepower is not a lot of power. Even if you are 594 tons on only less than 600 tons, 3,800 shaft horsepower is not a lot of horsepower. And when you're going against the currents and winds you get off the coast of Dunkirk, that is not going to give you a lot of speed. That's not going to give you a lot of capability. And in shallow waters you can't maneuver that well anyway. And it's sort of, to me, unsurprising she's one of the vessels which gets caught. Because also, she's going to be fighting back as much as she can do, but let's be honest, with only one 3.7-inch howitzer, which I don't think is an AA weapon, the 4-inch guns on single 40-degree mounts, so they're not AA weapons, so it's her machine guns which are air defense. She's not going to have exactly the strongest air defense of a ship ever, is she? Karen, the photo on the top reminds me of the African Queen. Probably should, but please note, of these two vessels, Locust here is the only one of the 5 in the class who survived World War II. B is never completed. There is a debate as to whether she's even laid down. There are some instructors which seems though she was being constructed, but she's never completed. Scorpion is lost. Locust survives. Grasshopper is lost. Dragonfly is lost, and Mosquito is lost. This is her in her final form with a quadruple pom-pom, replacing the 3.7-inch gun, and later refitted with 3 20mm guns and 20 depth charges. Became a headquarters ship in 1944, which she's probably pretty good at. Percy, question. I presume they were built in the UK and then sailed to where they had to go? Yes, they were. They were built by Vosper Thornycroft, the Yarrow shipbuilder, Yarrow's shipbuilders, and J.S. White. Are those awnings on the ship? They did have awnings on them. But those are actually sort of their deck lines. Dunkirk was one of those, for everything we've got at it, ops and works remarkably well, but yeah, I don't want to be a shipping going across the channel then. No. No, you wouldn't. Then we had the fate of Dragonfly, Grasshopper and Scorpion, and this is why I put a link in down below for the evacuation of Singapore. I've also put in, well, that you can recognise this. This comes from the lovely Scorpion's U-Boat Net page, showing her details and giving you an actual picture point of where she is sunk. Now, when you talk about these vessels, I should point out that they were not the only ones carrying people. There are some debates as to exactly how many people go aboard of which ships, and one of the things I often point out is they're not exactly organised in Singapore at this point. If they'd been organised, they'd have put some troops on the to protect the water reservoir, which had prepared positions, and, well, if they hadn't lost control of their water, and the Japanese hadn't been able to take it without a fight, they wouldn't have had to concede when they did, and the Japanese probably would have run out of food and been forced to withdraw before the British did. Or rather, the Japanese would have run short of food, kept trying to fight, and eventually collapsed through malnourishment and lack of hunger after about 3 or 4 days, and then there would have been a lot of prisoners taken by the British. It's one of those quirks of fate. You put a couple of companies, a battalion, to protect the reservoir, and you actually run a proper defensive. System of Singapore instead of the mess you make of it, and you probably have a Japanese army which falls apart because of lack of logistics, and then the entire conversation about the war in Southeast Asia changes, because if the Japanese have to try and take Singapore a second time instead of being able to send troops elsewhere in Southeast Asia, then that delays all sorts of things and causes all sorts of fun. But we'll leave that to one side. Now, interesting enough, I call them Dragonfly class, that's what the Royal Navy list them as, but the lovely person that is the author on the Naval Historical Society of Australia lists them as Locust class. I'm not quite sure why. Probably because Locust is the vessel which survives World War II. What was the cause of lack of organisation? Was it just around Malaysia, or was there structural incompetence thing going on? Okay, if you consider Britain is fighting an actual active war in North Africa, so that's where you're having to send the A-team. They're worried about invasions and attacks on the UK, so you can't afford to send the B-team away from the UK. They're also running operations in the Middle East, in Iraq and Iran, etc. So they have more troops being deployed out there. And fundamentally, the officers sent to Malaya are unprepared, and their units are not. Let's put it this way: the units which had been out in Malaya pre-war were not the units who were then fighting in Malaya. The units who had been trained up in Malaya, who'd been kept very well trained due to the threat of war with Japan, had been deployed off to fight in Africa, etc. So the troops out there hadn't been trained in the areas. The command staff hadn't worked together. They weren't necessarily the best officers available, because the very best were being taken where they were needed to go, and there's no sensible command structure. So it's a whole load of mixture and problems there. And that also features into one of the things which the Naval Historical Society Australia's paper, which I linked to below, does complain about. It says, the British don't allocate enough spaces to the Australians for the evacuation. And you sit there and go, well, A, it's a fricking terrible evacuation when you consider what happens to a lot of these troops and a lot of their ships. And B, I'm just going to point this one out, B, it's a fucking disorganized mess. So instead of thinking it's a purposeful slight, it's probably more a failing of their planning and a failing of their organization than it is something which is a purposeful slight. They're not purposely thinking, we won't bother to evacuate the Australians. They're just not thinking. And that's the whole thing through Malaya. There are many options of what you could do. For starters, you should have destroyed your own airfields or honestly not built them in the first place. If you don't have aircraft, don't build the airfields for them. Okay, first rule, don't build the aircraft for aircraft you don't have. If you're going to rely on aircraft for your defence and flying an aircraft, make sure you have the aircraft before you're actually going to start building airfields. Maintain temporary airfield equipment. Keep it all back at Singapore. Build airfields at Singapore for the aircraft to surge into, and then fly them from Singapore forwards. That will give you plenty of capability, but it also means you don't have all these multiple airfields to defend all over the place, and also built in the forest to help the enemy. Secondly, have some lines of defence prepared. and have them worked on so you work out an actual comprehensive line of defence and secure it. And thirdly, always maintain, it's important, this is something which you, it's so easy for for people to forget, but at the same time as you've got staff officers working out your plans for advance and how you engage the enemy, you should always have an officer working away somewhere on plans of withdrawal if things go wrong, on where you take your troops back to. You should have some engineers working on defensive positions that they can fall back to if things go wrong. And you can always tell comprehensive, sensible armies, because they will waste a lot of resources doing that, but they will do it. Because if they need it, they really need it. And no one will complain. Afterwards, there's plenty to complain about. There's always someone going, oh, it was such a waste doing that. It was such a waste. It was off the route of march. It was pointless. Waste of effort. And you're right. It is a waste of effort. Because you didn't end up needing it. But if you needed it, oh boy, would it have been considered essential. And combined up with all with a lot of bad luck, and it gets terrible. Anyway, they had, they were steam turbine vessels. They, as it sort of lists out their various weapons. Scorpion made her escape on the 9th of February. She managed to survive air attacks, but then had a nasty encounter with a Japanese cruiser, Yura, and 2 destroyers, where she was sunk. She actually tried to fight back. Please note, she did not go down quietly into the night. She's against a cruiser and 2 destroyers, and she has 2 4-inch guns, a 3.7-inch howitzer, and 8 machine guns, and she does not go quietly into the night. One of the other survivors, 8 were picked up by the Japanese, and 6 more were found by the steamer Matahari. Dragonfly and Grasshopper, they sailed in company on the 13th of February. Interestingly enough, Scorpion is sunk on, I think she is sunk on the, yeah. Scorpion is sunk in the Banker Strait on the 13th of February. The same day Dragonfly and Grasshopper leave. They are sunk on the 14th of February by aircraft. So Dragonfly's hit 3 times. Let's be honest. There is no way these ships were designed to be hit by 3 aircraft bombs of any size. Grasshopper was hit twice and set on fire, but a captain managed to beach her on nearby Sabaya Islands. Most survivors were captured, and severe loss of life from both vessels. The whole problem for the British in the Far East, and the reason the plans fall apart, is the British war for fighting in the Far East falls apart not in 1941, not even in 1939. The British war plan for the Far East falls apart in 1933. The moment the Japanese announced they are leaving the treaties, the British should have said, right then, if the treaties aren't going to hold, we can't continue to be in them and be bound by them. B, honestly, you can go back further and you can say it's the lack of constructing of sloops in numbers of sloops of vessels. When you've got low limit on your number of sloops you can build, and those sort of vessels which can do anti-submarine warfare work, the whole reason the Royal Navy is not match building sloops and destroyers from 1928 onwards, I do not understand. It's a cost thing, it's a argument thing, but honestly, it's a stupid thing, because that would have given you a huge pool of anti-submarine warfare ships, which could well have saved vessels like Royal Oak and could have saved, well, Courageous and Glorious. And the reason I say that is because if you save Royal Oak, you have another capital ship going around, in which case you might have, that will possibly free up another capital ship, which might mean there's a capital ship escorting the one back, which gets sunk by Scharnhorst and Gneisenau. And the one doing anti-submarine warfare could have had a sloop with close enough escort that, frankly, the submarine didn't get close enough. And if you have those available, that will change also you'll need to do a panic build of escorts, because if you have a load of sloops built, you don't need to panic build escorts quite as much, you've got that better issue. So you don't cancel the building of carriers and capital ships. So you definitely have carriers available. And if you'd had carriers available, then Force Z would have been survived, because any carrier, it wouldn't take a massive carrier, just the carrier being there to provide air defense with its fighters, breaking up the strikes coming in, would have meant those ships survive, because they did. At least Repulse would survive. Prince of Wales, who knows? That's being handled by the book, but that's not a sensible book. But definitely Repulse survives, and probably Prince of Wales survives, at which point you don't get the evacuation of Singapore. Because if you've got a Royal Navy task group still operating in that region, there is no way the troops get close enough to Singapore in time to force the British out of Singapore. So basically you have to go back a long way. And it's all a load of stupid decisions. It's all about saving money, not abandoning Australia, saving money. Anyway, I'm not a fan of MacArthur. I think he should have been shot rather than a Medal of Honor, Major Commander through his failures to follow orders and started a war. Who were who were fighting, still fighting in North Africa, East Africa, still worried about the Germans only a few miles across the water, merrily bombing our cities at night. Honestly, descriptions of commands in the Philippines. You've done multiple things in there, Dan. Dan, let's see, how far down is the CD team? Is this like the bottom of the 20% of the Sandhurst? Probably. If you're considering the A team is probably the top 20%. The B team is probably the 20% below that. The CD team are the 20 to 40% below that. And the rest won't be left in the service. Now, you also have to remember that you're dealing with people who are... How do I put this? A lot of the reason they are the CD team is because of how their experiences in World War I and how they've shaped them. So they might be a very good training officer, but they might fall apart in operations. But you're sending them out to a training command. Remember, HMS Exeter is out there. The whole point, the British have all these forces out there who are training up. Exeter's sent out because after the Battle of River Plate, she goes back to UK. She's reduced to ordinary and sent into a massive refit to repair her after the damage she's done at the Battle of River Plate. So all her crew are broken up, and then she's given a new crew and she's sent out to the Far East to do some working up. It's supposed to be a safe zone. And Benjamin, some of the admirals, America's best admirals and generals were bottom of their class, and some of their worst ones were at the top of their class. Because basically, it's not the ones who are the top 20% or Sandhurst which matters. It's in each group. The top 20% of generals you have, the top 20%, next 20% of generals, the next 20%. Now, this is not to say they had universally bad officers out there. They have some very good officers out there, and one who goes on to become a field marshal, who's very capable in Burma. Sir William Sloane. But the thing is, they're hampered, and they're hampered by especially the whole point. The Army and the Air Force had always relied on the Navy being able to come. The whole point was the Navy was supposed to come and defend the Far East while they organised themselves, and their whole plans, when you look at it, basically concede on that. And the Navy's committed. The Navy's fighting in the Mediterranean. The Navy's fighting in the Atlantic, having to maintain a force in the North Atlantic to deal with German surface raiders probably hitting convoys of Britain. They don't have the ships to spare. And they don't have the ships to spare because they've lost ships already in the war. And you have to remember, when this happens, you've lost Ark Royal. You've lost Courageous. You've lost Glorious. You've got Illustrious damaged. You've got Formidable... damaged, I think. You've lost battleships. You've lost Royal Oak, you've lost other vessels, a Hood, you've lost all sorts of vessels when this happens. This is not the Royal Navy of 1939, this is the Royal Navy of 1941. And the problem is those have happened because of the not investing earlier on. If you'd invested in those sloops, which are those cheapest chips vessels, as I've talked about before, which do anti-submarine warfare and all sorts of things, as anti-submarine warfare multipliers in the 1920s. If you had built, let's say, you had match build with your destroyers, you would have had roughly 180 vessels, and you could have spread them out. You could have given some to the Royal Australian Navy, some to the Royal Indian Navy, some to the Royal South African Navy, some to the Royal Canadian Navy. You could have given, spread them all around and gone, yes, you'll maintain these things and put some in reserves. It really doesn't matter. You could have maintained them. You'd have had 180 vessels to call upon for anti-submarine warfare duties. That would then be cumulative, because that would also release the pressure on your destroyers doing anti-submarine warfare duties or escorting coastal convoys. You could still have destroyers with those coastal convoys, but you wouldn't need as many because you've got a sloop there which can provide air defence. It's got 3 twin 4-inch mounts. It's fine. That's going to add this 40mm. That's AA. That's fine. It's got ASDIC and it's got depth charges. That's fine. It'll do the anti-submarine. You can later upgrade it with an anti-submarine mortar. It's got everything you need. And if you just kept that up, you wouldn't have lost probably Royal Oak, because you had more vessels going around Scapa Flow, so that would have stopped any submarine getting in. You, as I said, Courageous and Glorious might not have been lost because of cumulative effects, and just the cumulative impact of that vessel, that lot, would have changed all sorts of parts of history. Alvaski, more sloops. Ark Royal might not get a torpedo as well. Yes, there's a good chance, because, again, here is the thing. Ark Royal, people go, well, she wouldn't have had sloops escorting her. No, she'd have destroyers escorting her. But if you have more sloops around, then that frees up destroyers from some of those duties, so you have more destroyers available to do things like escorting Ark Royal. You know, that is how the stuff builds up. It's cumulative. Yes, and who was Chancellor of the Exchequer when that little debacle occurred? Let's see. Well, he was Chancellor. Winston Churchill was Chancellor of Exchequer in Stanley Baldwin's government, but he's following Stanley Baldwin's instructions. And again, yes, he could make more money, but in a nice way, he's going to make priorities, sort of prioritize the things the Prime Minister tells him to prioritize. That's the way it works in a government on those scenarios. And yes, it's one of those scenarios. Yes, you can also blame the Admiralty. They should have pushed more for sloops, but they were worried if they asked for sloops, they wouldn't get destroyers. And it's a whole failure of the whole government. In the nicest way, 9631, it's a long time before appeasement comes about. And appeasement was not about, in the nicest way, but appeasement is not believing that war will never happen again. Appeasement is about a realization amongst the political class that Britain is not prepared for war and trying to buy time before war happens. Appeasement is about desperately trying to buy time before a war begins. It's that scenario. Yeah, France falling is a bit out of context, as is Norway falling. In the nicest way, the plans for World War II, the British war plans, none of them considered the idea of both France and Norway falling. None of them considered either of them falling. They thought Norway would be benevolent neutral at worst, and France would be fighting as an ally. And the moment you lose them as well, that multiplies the issues for the Royal Navy and multiplies the commitments for the Royal Navy, and just means that they are even weaker in the Far East. It's not a case of abandoning Australia, it's just there's nothing else to go round. There's nothing left. Then let's see, how well do sloops operate with a large fleet? One of the criteria for a sloop is they can't go faster than 20 knots. They can't be designed to go faster than 20 knots. So usually they don't operate with the larger fleet, but often they do operate with convoys. So if you think about that, you would use sloops as your convoy escorts, your coastal convoy escorts. You'd use sloops as your patrol boats, your minesweepers, your present ships in certain places of the world. So they free up destroyers, even the older V&W destroyers, they free up for these things. And they'll also be operating, often you would have, if you had enough sloops, you'd probably have some hunter groups operating around places like Gibraltar, going around Gibraltar patrolling for submarines. Basically just firing off ASDIC and going, is there a submarine waiting near Gibraltar? Which is Freeman. Well, as I just mentioned, if they're patrolling Gibraltar, that will make the straits more difficult. Rearc Royal loss. You would also have more ships potentially giving you boats out of mid, so that one might not have got through. It's all cumulative. If the BAF would have gone to Norway, maybe North Norway could have been held. If the BAF had gone to Norway, if they'd only held North Norway, then frankly I would be annoyed. Frankly, if the BAF had been in Norway, if they hadn't managed to push the frigating Germans out of Norway, there's a problem going on. The fact is, the whole German operation for Norway is done on a wing and a prayer, and if the Norwegians had just sent out one radio call to their people, it would have been over. If they had alerted their people there was going to be invasion by radio, they would have had all the places armed. And then even if you do have people who are German sympathizers, etc., who sympathise with the Germans, and also they probably wouldn't. They're probably also going to be passionately nationalists, so they won't want to see an invasion of their country. And secondly, if there's been a radio thing and you try and say, "Well, I'm not sure if we should fire on that German ship that we've been told if they invade we fire, sir." Well, I'm not sure. Then it's a good way to find your second in command putting a bullet through your head. It's quite simple, that scenario. That's how you motivate your officers and make sure all are kept honest. You tell everyone, because the odds are, if there are any sympathisers, they're going to be very few in number versus the sizes of any garrisons. And considering the garrisons are mostly reservists called up, reservists tend to be even more independently minded than anyone else. And even less likely to listen to officers who are going, "But shouldn't we check, old boys?" No. It's our land, it's our wives and kids who are about to get beaten up by German jackboots. In the nicest way, we're going to start shooting back. If you don't want to shoot back, sir, that's fine. Your choice is to sit over there quietly, or we can take you outside now and you can start digging. Gary, does anyone know why I can't see chat on my smart TV, but do on my tablet? No idea. Dan, the idea would, in retrospect, be more Keynesian economic policy to support the industrial shipbuilding in the Depression by ordering more ships. Yes, and also if you're ordering sloops, they are turbine powered, and if you're building more turbines, that means you have a larger number of you have more turbine production facilities for wartime. Plus, sloops tend to use the same ASDIC, the same electronics fit as destroyers do. So you're basically ordering twice as much as you need for your destroyers, and therefore that increases the industrial base as what you would the industrial base, your peacetime industrial base, which gives you a larger industrial base to grow for wartime production of destroyers and destroyer-based equipment. So ASDIC and radar and all those other systems would have been far more easily available and would have been able to grow far quicker and far more if you'd been ordering sloops since 1928. What is a Scapa flow and how fast does it flow? Scapa flow is the base for the area which is used as sort of between some islands, which is used as a basing area for the Royal Navy in World War I and World War II. And still to this day has some presence. Actually, if you had the sloops, I'm guessing you'd be able to have enough time to design something better than the flowers. The flowers do the same as those, but I converted fishing rods, not designed warships. The flowers are actually designed warships. Actually, I've said this before, and I'm doing a whole book about this, but basically the flowers, the process goes, they design what they find out with sloops and building sloops, what they need to fit into an escort, and then they find a merchant hull, which will take that. So they are designed warships. They're just not built to warship standards because they want to be built them in merchant yards as fast as you can. You probably still would build flowers, but they wouldn't be as emergency. We need ships. They would be, we need ships because we need to multiply our forces. That's good. Wait, did someone get Dr. Clarke talking about Norway, Crete, Singapore again? Yes. Do we get to the Greys? Yes, we do get to Greys. So, Dunkirk and Singapore are not the end of the gunboat story. They are part of it, but there are more gunboats around than that. There's the story about an entire Norwegian village island that went back to England after a commando raid on the radar post. There are a few scenarios where a large number... Basically, any time they did a raid on Norway, they got a rather large number of Norwegians come back. It was considered a very profitable scenario. And in Cortez, how should Japan and the United States use their gunboats in the Pacific High Side? We'll go on to the American gunboats. They're easier to talk about than the Japanese ones, but we are going to talk about the American gunboats. Someone needs to do a Norway, Crete, Singapore rant supercut. It would be long. It will be. Oh, good lord. How low am I? 1, 2. Oh, I have 2 left there. Oh. Oh, good God. Good lord. I only have 2 left. I only have enough left for Sunday. I need to order more. Oh, that's scary. Oh, Sarah. Alright, let's plough through the Crete rant. No, we're not getting... The Crete rant isn't coming today. The Crete rant doesn't need to be here. The Crete rant. How not to defend the frigating island? How not to? There's a perfectly sensible Royal Marine officer who comes in and draws up a perfectly sensible plan. Then you send an army officer whose first thing he does, chuck out the plan the Royal Marine drew up because, of course, he can't know what he's doing. He's a Royal Marine. And try and reinvent the frigating wheel and muck it up. Yes! It's brilliant. Crete is brilliant. A great example of inter-service cooperation. And then the Navy, who supplied the Royal Marine in the first place, who drew up the decent plan, then have to come and pull you out of the frigating fire. It's just... Seriously! So this is not a complaint about the soldiers. The soldiers fight well. The soldiers are brave. They're everything you want. They are lovely. It's the blooming generals. Right then. Do we get to the Greys? Let's do something before my blood pressure does go over with Singapore. Right? Let's get to this Greys, the steam gunboats. Now, there is, of course, SGB-7 is not a Grey, technically, because she's lost before they got names. They don't get their names till 1943, when their new flotilla leader goes, "Why do my boats not have names?" And everyone else is looking at him going, "Well, they don't need names." And he looks at them and goes, "My boats need names." And they go, "Well, no, mate, they don't need names." And he goes, "My boats are getting names." And there's a whole long discussion which basically involves how do I put this politely? Well, their officer, their commanding officer, flotilla officer, basically putting his foot down until they give him permission to name them. Now, are you all probably wondering who that officer was? Well, it's quite a special one. And he's quite politically powerful in his own way. It's Lieutenant Commander Peter Scott, who's son of the Arctic explorer, Captain Robert Scott. Peter, of course, is later a noted ornithologist, a conservationist, and broadcaster. But more importantly, Peter is quite loud. And he's not the type to be cowed by them going, but they are motor torpedo boats, so they only get numbers. No, they're big, they're steam-powered, they deserve a name. But, and eventually he gets his way. It's, you know, these things work. These things do work. Son Penguin's rant indeed, yeah. Portugal from Chicago. Are you Atlas or Cato for your engaged track? Cato. I used to be Pico, but I've decided to go to Cato because Pico is annoying me. It's very, very fussy if I try and give it any details at engage. At my OO gauge, it's fine, but at engage it just gets very, very fussy, especially the points. So that's why the vessels were named Grey Seal, Grey Fox, Grey Owl, Grey Shark, Grey Wolf, and Grey Goose. Because you do not piss off an ornithologist, naval officer, son of a hero, who is their flotilla commander, and who wants to name his boats. He wants to name them, no one's going to argue them. Now, it should be noted that for a small while, Grey Goose became really, really important in the world after World War II. She had her steam engines replaced by Vospers with a pair of Rolls-Royce RM60 gas turbines. These turbines were not only, of course, as left they were, they featured intercooled compressors, recuperators, as well, to boost turbine power output and reduce fuel consumption. The turbine power plant provided 35% more power. So if you think about that, they have 8,000 shaft horsepower in their original form. You add on 35% more to that. That's roughly 2,000... Well, 35% is roughly 3,000 more horsepower. So take the shaft horsepower. So it takes out 11,000 shaft horsepower. They weigh 225 tons in deep load, 175 tons in standard. Okay. However, it gave 35% more power, but it weighed 50% less than the steam engines had, which cuts their weight considerably, and took up 25% less space. So Grey Goose, for a short while, became possibly the fastest moving object ever to be put on water. Now, unfortunately, the power plant proved incredibly successful, but it was felt to be too complex and the supporting technology was too mature for wider service at times. So she's then placed in reserve, the engines are removed, and eventually sold off, and she becomes a houseboat. Now, the last details I have her was her in 2020 when she was moored on the River Medway near Hoe at St. Were in Kent, England. But so she could be still be around. So Grey Goose could still be around. Always nice to know. Now, these ships, what are they originally built for? Well, it's very simple. Schnellboots, or E-boats, as we tend to call them. They're built to hunt them down and kill them. They were considered a problem. The Royal Navy wasn't sure what to do with them. And they didn't want to keep dedicating destroyers to them. So they decided to pursue two policies. They developed two vessels to deal with them. There are these steam gunboats and the Fairmile Ds. We'll get onto the Fairmile Ds in a bit. But they only build 7 of these. They planned 52. They cancelled 2. Now, if they'd been really successful, they probably would have built the full 52. But the thing is, they were found to be a bit big. And whilst they did have end up having an end of World War II service as fast mine layers, for which they were absolutely spectacular, with a top speed, with their original power plant of 35 knots. Again, imagine how much 11,000 shaft horsepower got up to if 8,000 shaft horsepower at 175 tons got up to 35 knots. Imagine what 11,000 at what I've heard was possibly as low as 150 tons got her up to. So they basically built these vessels with their 3-inch gun, their 2 single 6-pounder guns. There are two twin 20mm Oricon cannon and 2 21-inch torpedo tubes. They were designed to fight pretty much anything afloat in that form, and they found them not economical to build in sufficient numbers. But they were still pretty darn useful. Dan Freeman, I thought SGB-1 and SGB-2 were damaged beyond reasonable repair on the stocks in bombing raid of Southampton. And it's certainly one of the things put around about them, but they are being built at Thornycroft Woolston. And the trouble is, at the same time, Thornycroft Woolston managed to build quite a lot of things. So unless those things managed to get really specialist attention, I'm not sure why they didn't get finished and others did. Now, the lead design group was Denny's of Dunbarton in designing these ships, but they were built by Thornycroft, Yarrow, Hawthorne Leslie, Denny, and J. Samuel Whites at Cowes. They are rather cool. And rather capable. But their main problem comes with the fact they are quite so large. And this means they have quite a high silhouette in the water. And the trouble is that silhouette at night can make them look like a far more attractive target than they are. Because if you look at that silhouette, it does look sort of like a destroyer profile. Then we have the Fairmile Seas. The Fairmile Sea. Now, Fairmile Sea is not as famous as the Fairmile D. It really isn't. And that's because it was designed to be the pure motor gunboat. To use the words of John Lambert and Al Ross, as noted above, the Norman Hart design prototype Fairmile became the A-type, which while under construction improved the viability of the Fairmile mass construction method, being followed by a further 11 units. While it's fair to say that design did have the inherent problems of short range and poor manoeuvrability, all 12 boats were in service by the summer of 1940, at a time when escorts were in very short supply and Britain was expecting invasion any time. The Navy required additional gunboats as soon as possible, and an improved design was still at the planning stage. This was to be the D-type, with 4 engines of increased power, but the prototype was not to be laid down until the 1st of June 1941. However, the building the jigs for the A-type was still available,
and so has decided to make use of them as an interim measure. The A-type design had at least proved sound and seaworthy, and could be modified and improved. The decision was made to construct a number of improved A-type fair miles, exactly similar in as regards construction and accommodation, but fitted with 3 supercharged Hull Scott Defender engines, each rated at 900 horsepower. The opportunity was also taken to remedy some of the earlier design defects. The bridge was redesigned in line with motor torpedo practice, and to take up less deck area, fuel capacity was increased from the original 1200 to 1800 gallons, and armament fit was much improved. While the hull lines remained identical, in fact, the width of the forecastle was slightly reduced. 24 such motor launches, to be known as the Type C, were on the 27th August 1940, and the first keel was laid on the 1st of December. The design of displacement was 66.5 tons and would give a maximum speed of 27 knots, some 2 knots more than the original A. However, armament and other equipment inevitably increased the actual displacement, which became 72 tons, thus reducing the speed by half a knot and giving a maximum continuous speed of 22 knots. The improved fuel capacity gave a range of 305 miles. Now, the thing about a C you have to remember is that, like all British torpedo boats, barring the steam gunboats, they were made of wood. And that's why those jigs matter. If you have jigs, when you're designing wooden boats and you're building wooden hulls, you need jigs to maintain its shape. It's critical, especially when you're building them out of basically variations of, well, oh, sometimes it's not too different. It's marine ply. Sometimes it's different words, but sometimes it's just marine ply. And pretty much they are being built, they are being sort of, how do I put this, almost wetted and dried into shape as much as anything. These vessels are incredibly light for what's in them. They also have virtually no protection for their occupants. And the purpose of these gunboats was very simple: to provide cover to the torpedo boats to allow them to get close, to escort convoys with firepower, and to provide cover for torpedo boats to get close. It becomes even more key when you're looking at the Fairmaldese. All these vessels, once you start looking at gunboats and you start looking at the motor gunboats, it really starts to remind you of the Tribal class destroyers. Well, it does me. Because the Tribals are built with the aim... Hang on. I should put that on charge quickly. The Tribals are built with the aim of providing firepower in order to get other destroyers, the torpedo-oriented vessels, as close to the enemy as possible. Gunboats, torpedo and motor gunboats, are built to get their motor torpedo boat Breffen as close to the enemy as possible. Very good. 7 times marine ply. Yes. However, I would say that... Okay. At one point, this material is tried, which is called sheet pine. Don't get me started, but... The idea was to try and make a version of marine ply, basically a version of ply, using sheets of pine and spruce in overlapping, interlocking layers. And the idea was you built it of thin enough strands so that you cut it up really, really fine, and then you made it up sort of like that, and in overlapping almost a shiplag way, and it multiple layers, and it's a nightmare. It honestly is an absolute nightmare, but it was an idea they were considering. And I don't think they actually ended up using it, but my dad always maintained that that
one of the people who trained him said they did. Which is why I say marine ply and other woods, because of what my dad said. Cody 85. Imagine the shenanigans they could have got up to in the Solomons or something like the Greys. Actually, that's the really interesting thing, because imagine if these had been available at Singapore. Because let's be honest, being able to go 35 knots, they could possibly have got those people out of there. Because how far could they have gone at night time before they got before the enemy? And also, if you consider the Japanese cruiser and destroyers forces again, if that thing's steaming past at 35 knots, are you gonna catch it? It will be. It might be if it's hugging the coast and keeping in the clutter of the coast. You're not gonna see it. But they don't have them in time, and this is another thing again. This is another problem for me. Okay. Motor torpedo boats, patrol boats, they're under the same provisions as Article 8, because if we go to the London Treaty, which is the most recent one, and we go for it, and we look at its text, right then, go down to Article 8. Subject to any special agreements, we may submit them to limitation. The following vessels are exempt from the limitation: naval surface combatant vessels of 600 tons standard displacement and under. So you could build as many motor torpedo boats in peacetime and motor gunboats as you want, because they're less than 600 tons. Naval surface combatants exceeding 600 tons but not exceeding 2,000 tons standard displacement, provided they have none of the following characteristics: mount a gun above 6.1 inches in caliber, mount more than 4 guns above 3 inches in caliber, are designed or fitted to launch torpedo, are designed for a speed greater than 20 knots. Naval surface vessels, C. Naval surface vessels not specifically built as fighting ships, which are employed on fleet duties or as crew transports or in some other way than as fighting ships, provided they have none of the following characteristics: mount a gun above 6.1 inch gun and caliber, mount more than 4 guns above 3 inch caliber, are designed or fitted to launch torpedo, are designed for a speed greater than 20 knots, are protected by armor plate, are designed or fitted to launch mines, are fitted to receive aircraft on board from the air. D. Mount more than 1 aircraft launching apparatus on the centerline, or 2 on each broadside. E. If fitted with any means of launching aircraft in the air, are designed or adapted to operate at sea more than 3 aircraft. Article 8 exempts all those vessels from limitation. Are you honestly telling me that the Royal Navy could not have designed vessels around those criteria, which they did? They did have them, they had sloops and seaplane carriers, etc., and couldn't have fielded something which would have been helpful? This guy, funny, in Hawaii they made plywood out of sugarcane, called cane board. What a nightmare. Can we leak for the MG? A link for the MGTV. Yeah, I'll get one for you. You'll enjoy this. It's a whole series. I should admit, it's a whole series. I'll put in the link to number 1. I'm still waiting for Volume 3 to come out. But I've given you Vosper MTB Volume 2, links to Volume 1 and Volume 2. You should find the links down in the description. The nasty class are not listed as gunboats, so that's why they weren't put in there. Listed as patrol boats, and whilst I would say they probably do fit closer to the gunboat category, they are not listed. They are listed under their patrol boats. So I concentrate on their gunboats because, well, I thought it'd be quite fun, and they're also not built till 1962. So these are on World War II ships. Very good. Apply is quite different to fibre chipboard. It is. There is interesting things going on. Very good. Is it? If it is thin, multiple layers of wood, rotated so grains opposed, sealed with adhesive. Yeah, that's pretty much. But the thing is, instead of it being like that to that with the grain, it was like that to that. They're trying to make it more quickly, because doing that to that was apparently considered time consuming, whereas doing that to that would apparently be quicker. Right. Thermal Seas were pretty good, but they were a pretty good warm-up for what came next, really. And the thing that came next is the dog boats. Which, yes, there is a whole section in that book, but honestly, you want this one. You always want this one. It's, you know, it's just a lovely book. You can get it in Kindle, paperback, or hardcover. And I'll put a link to it again in the description. Hello, Brad. Now, the Thermal D dog boats. There's a really good quote in here. Holt's concept for the next development of Thermal MTB-MGB was to marry a destroyer bow to a fast motorboat stern, capable of accepting the greater power of 4 engines. He was working on this before the end of 1939. The aim was to obtain less pounding when driven at high speed into a head sea. And when you consider the pace of the development of these things, if the Royal Navy had been given the funding to maintain motor torpedo boats in numbers prior to World War II, you'd have probably had the D in service, or something like it, in service and in development, before World War II broke out, which would have been useful. and also to produce a dry boat forward by ploughing over the bow wave. The form had been tested experimentally to compare it with the round bilge form already developed. The result was a semi-hard chine design, with a sharp bow and a very distinctive flare, with a wide flat transom, which lent itself well to the arrangements of 4 shaft propellers. Holt later acknowledged that it was found that problems arose when it was necessary to maintain high speeds into short, steep sea conditions. Then the plywood frames forward tended to break. This was tackled successfully by doubling the number of frames forward and reinforcing parts of the hull with steel angle bars. The hull proved capable of providing the required greater speed, longer range, and heavy armament with a steady gun platform, and was acknowledged success. This then was the D-class Fairmail, soon to be known as the Dog Boat. The boats of the class were allocated a number 601 onwards. Sadly, this design did not lead to beauty. Compared with the sleek yacht-like hull of the Fairmail B most launched, the Dog Boat was at first sight, ugly. I'd say there's a rugged beauty going on myself, but maybe I'm biased. And there's a beautiful picture in this book of actually the jigs and everything in place of how they built it. Much beamier and very squat. Indeed, one CO joining his boat and remembering it was prefabricated was heard to mutter, "Is that the boat or the box it was delivered in?" By March 1941, the design was ready, and orders given for 12 motor gunboats with prototypes MG601 laid down in Tough Brothers Yard at Teddington on the 1st of June 1941. Within a few weeks, the order was increased to 40 boats, to be built at 15 boatyards. The first 32 boats were planned to be gunboats, and had no torpedo scallops cut into the hull forward of the bridge. But almost at once, it was recognised that some might be completed as MTBs. The boats from 633 onwards had scallops incorporated and could receive 21-inch torpedo tubes, even though some were completed as MGBs, that's motor gunboats. By November 1941, the order had been increased to 100 boats, and 4 more yards were building dogboats. A feature of the construction and class was the ease with which modifications could be introduced, proving the value of the prefabrication techniques and the flexibility of both planing and execution by the Fairmail method. This was quickly demonstrated when the decision was made to complete 4 of the first 8 flotillas, each of 8 boats, as MTBs rather than MGBs. Armament varied as new weapons and mountings became available, and it was not long before the Dogboat was recognised as the most powerfully armed fast motor boat in the navies of the world. Early flotillas soon settled to the normal configuration. The common elements were the 2-pounder pom-pom on the forecastle and the twin 0.5-inch machine mountings on each side of the bridge, twin Vickers 303 machine guns in the bridge wings. The MTBs had their 2 twin 21-inch torpedoes and a twin Oricon aft, while the MGBs mounted their twin Oricon on the coach roof and had a hand-operated Hotchkiss 6-pounder aft. This gun, of ancient vintage, laid and trained by something akin to a bicycle chains, proved in action to be accurate and effective when manned by a well-trained crew, and was greatly respected. They are good ships, and they have multiple variants. They have let's see, a long-range recovery craft, which is used by the RAF. They have an anti-submarine boat variant, which is the MA/SB. They have, of course, the torpedo gunboat, the motor gunboat, the MTB, the MGB, and post-war they have the fast patrol boat, FPB. They're good vessels. They are really good vessels. Let's see what it tastes like. I think it should be okay. These bottles, I do notice, by the way, use the Highland Spring in them, then you put tap water in them, and they go a maximum of 3 days before they start smelling funny. Even if you're storing them in a fridge. It's 3 days, and then the water in them tastes funny. Yeah, Iron Brew's definitely better for my taste buds.
Dogboats, that woke up the orange cats up. They are cool. They are very cool. And again, as said, this book has 2 parts, and you will find more about various American vessels and British vessels in here. This one has the US submarine chase in here, and this might explain why I did focus on certain versions of their gunboats. What I do love about this book is it does have the full maps and plans in it. So if I quickly minimize this, and instead of sitting back in my chair lazily, actually do this. There you go. And you can see the way the hull is sculpted. And I do use that expression specifically. It does look sculpted to me. It's always looked like it's been designed to flow. They are very beautiful looking ships. Hello, Ruanon. Now, as far as I know, for the Fairmile Ds, 229 are completed. They weighed 104,000 motor torpedo boats. They were displaced 104 tons in standard, 120 tons fully loaded. As motor gunboats, they displaced 91 tons in standard, 109 tons fully loaded. But those are very much theoretical numbers, as these vessels had a habit of, how do I put this politely, gaining pounds. You'll also notice these are fairly good pictures of crews at work. And the reason you can tell they're crews at work rather than artistic pictures for propaganda, if you notice, there are holes in the woolly police. Please notice those motor torpedo boatmen have holes in their woolly police. That is not something you would stick in a propaganda photo. It looks bad. It makes the mums worry at home that their sons are cold. It makes all sorts of people feel a bit less macho. So there you can tell these are actual these are pictures which are sort of candid shots which are taken. And this shot and this one here are of it at speed, of them at speed. The one at the top, which is M727, it's in 1944, MTB 727. And it's just pootling along. As you can see, it has the scallops cut in it. If you look there, you can tell the gunboat from the torpedo boat by the scallops. And if you go back to this earlier, which we used, you can see in this coastal action, you can see how they used to work, where the motor torpedo boats would often attack try and attack from inshore, almost, and the motor gunboats would attack from offshore. So the MTBs would try and work their way round. The MGBs would then provide contrasting fire. And so it'd be something like this. The enemy would have fire coming in from one direction. Boom, boom, boom. 6-pounders going off. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, their problem. Okay, we fix fire on them. But you know also, if you fix fire and you start firing on them, you're going to reveal your position to the motor torpedo boats, which are not firing and not revealing their position. So you know there are these hunters. It's kind of like what USS Washington versus Kirishima. Kirishima firing away. Yeah, boom, boom, boom. Yes, I'm winning. Yes. But the more you fire, the more you reveal your position to the threat, which is getting closer and closer and closer. So you engage the motor gunboats, well, hey, they're firing at you, you're firing at them, maybe you sink one or two, maybe you don't sink any, considering the way they're dodging about,
And all the while you reveal your position to something which will definitely sink you, which is the motor torpedo boats. And that's basically how a Fairmile dog boat hunts. Just fun. Plenty of crew customization on the armaments. Oh, massive crew customization on the armaments. I cannot remember the grade of plastic off the top of my head, but it gives off gases once emptied the first time. Especially pitch. Put chlorinated water in it. It really breaks down fast. There are no known survivors of the D-boat class. There is a possible survivor of steam gunboats, but not a survivor of the D-boats. There are 2 abandoned wrecks. One is in Chatham, and one is in Ellingsøy in Norway. I'm not sure what state either of those wrecks are in. The Chatham one I haven't seen. I have looked for it when I've been wandering around Chatham. I've never managed to spot it. They built a lot of them. Could you fit a small hedgehog on it? No. Sadly enough, no. Shark teeth on the bow? Some of them did get some very interesting customized paint jobs. Again, not many pictures seem to survive. The main upset of them and worry about them was that of course, the Schnellboats, the E-boats, had this maximum theoretical speed of 43.8 knots. But it must be remembered there was a small difference, okay? The Schnellboats could go definitely faster in flatter seas. So if the sea was nice and calm, the Schnellboat had the speed. Which meant basically the Fairmile Ds, I had to wait for the Schnellboats to come to them or turn into ambush predators. However, in rough seas, these had the advantage because their speed held up far more than the Schnellboats did. So in the North Sea, especially in off Norway, the Schnellboats would often find the Royal Norwegian Navy's dog boats could A, outpace them, and B, really beat them up. And there's a whole basically chapter about the Norwegian dog boats in that book. Code 25, when was the last time someone reported seeing the one in Chatham? Apparently 2019. So it could have gone. But according to something I spotted in a chat thread, 2019. They are good looking boats though. Now, the Corby ships are expensive. Yes, I know. So this is why I'm saying thank you to whoever sent me this one. But I don't know who sent it to me because they would have to know my address because it actually arrived at my own house. And as more of you know, I give out Drak's address because Drak is very happy and lets people post to him. Whereas, in the nicest way, I live with my mum and my sister. And I often am off travelling and wandering, so I don't tend to give out the address because it's not really fair when you're leaving them home alone. Yes, they've got dogs, yes, they've got layers of cameras, and yes, they've got a security system which has been designed and implemented by myself. But, and it's a very customised security system, and frankly, that shouldn't act as a come on to anyone. It's designed by a historian. It's nothing modern. But it's a case of I don't have advertised my address because of that. So very few people have my address, so that limits down who could have sent it to me. And I've asked pretty much everyone who I know who has my address and gone, have you? I'm like, no. Do you think it could fit a 3-inch 60? Well, as time goes on, they get upgraded, the dog boats, to having 2 single 6-pounder guns, to having 2 which start off as manually controlled ones, and later on become auto-powered ones. For example, the one you're seeing pictured here is fitted with the Mullins autoloader. Which would increase rate of fire, etc. It was considered a fairly successful system. Isn't your address public record? Not really. You can't search and find people's addresses as a rule in the UK. I have Googled it and checked. The dog boat, which might be in Norway. Oh, I haven't left that page, have I now? Yeah, I did, didn't I? That's helpful, Axe. That is very helpful. Ellingsoy. Yeah. Very good. A security system designed by a historian, Motten Bailey, with aerostats and armed peasantry. Ah, my dear friend. Yeah. Oh, in the nicest way, I have had some very interesting students in the past. So now we've got on to what could also be called tank boats, the Soviet gunboats. I am, at a certain point, probably going to get a PO box. It would seem sensible to do so. It would seem sensible to do so. However, and by the way, I found a couple of very interesting web pages on this topic while I was hunting through them. So I'm going to put in one of them, which is sort of slightly more interesting to try and track down. Because the Soviet Navy is kind of obsessed with their gunboats. And that mainly seems to be because they get sunk by the Finnish quite a lot. They do. Anyway, so there are many, many types of Soviet gunboats, but the main ones I'm going to talk about are the Project 1124 and Project 1125 vessels, aka known as the BKA 1124 and the BKA 12125, produced in 1934 and 1938 respectively. So, the 1934 vessels, which were mass produced really from 1935, used the fact that the USSR was already producing a huge number of tank turrets. Now, these change at when they first enter service. The ones being built are being armed with T-28 and T-35 tank turrets. In 1939, they start getting fitted with T-34 tank turrets because the USSR is producing more tank turrets than it's producing for tanks. Okay? There were 60 in service during the German invasion, and 150 more were built. And their purpose was, if you consider what's going on in the world at the moment with Russia, and if you consider Eastern Europe is incredibly riverine. There are lots of very large rivers going hither and thither, and you need fire support for them. You need fire support to go up them, to attack targets which are along the river. You need fire support to help you cross the rivers. You need fire supports to help you secure the rivers. These are really critical vessels. But they do get better. They get better because, you know, you're sitting there, you're a Soviet general, and you're sitting there going, comrade, there's just something on these gunboats. What is missing? Just something, not quite there. Comrade, there's not something not quite there. And comrade goes, I know, comrade, I know. Let's give it a Katyusha! Yes! Let's put a rocket launcher on the back! So you have a T-34 in the front and a rocket launcher on the back. Ta-da! The answer to every question you never knew you had about the Russian Marine Forces. Let's start off with something which has 2 tank turrets and displaces 42 tons. And has armor between 15 and 50 millimeters thick, top speed of 28 knots, and, you know, a crew of 17. But let's grow that. Let's grow this, you know, to something which has 29 tons standard. Has top speed also 28 knots. Has a tank gun, again with 76mm on it, has a 12.7 heavy machine gun, has 2 7.6mm light machine guns for AA, and has a crew of 10, but of course has on its back the Katyusha! It's just... Who? What kind of mentality is sitting there going, you know what, we haven't got enough bang on our tank gunboats. They just don't have enough tank guns. I think we need to improve their reach. So let's give them a rocket launcher. It's the fact that the Germans got as far as they did, crossing as many Russian, Soviet-controlled rivers as they did, amazes me frequently because of these things wandering around. Because seriously, how you do a river crossing when those are turning up by the flotilla? I have suddenly got some impression that the German army might have been better than I often think it was. Katyusha launcher. Oh, they all came with vodka as standard. And please note, in 1943 they did produce an even bigger one, which had how do I put this politely? That were called the MBKs, right? And well, they displaced 151 ton standard, 158 fully loaded. They had a top speed of up to 18 knots. They carried two 76mm, a 37mm, four 12.7mm AA, and could be fitted with a range of other things. And they had an armoured belt of 50mm to 25mm, deck of between 30 and 15mm, turrets with the face up to 45mm, and conning tower had 8mm of armour around it, and are basically designed to act as the squadron command ships. You should note these vessels are as problematic as you can imagine them to be. It's pretty much entirely down to German air power that the Germans managed to survive against these things in river crossings. Artillery, they call in everything to try and sink these things. They are sensibly kind of deathly scared of them. Ingenious Iron, could gunboats painted black, operating at night and using spotlights be an effective strategy for killing subs, at least the deterrent subs operating near the coast? That is why gunboats, that's why the motor torpedo boats were MAS boats, MASBs, and they usually carried depth charges and Aztec. Dan Maxey, I just stepped in again, but tank turrets feel surprisingly utilitarian from a mass production perspective. I agree, and they are available. They have a lot of them. Okay. How did those tank turrets do on those gunboats? Original T-34 turrets were not good, and not a signpost of ergonomics and comfort. It's as fun as you think it could be, but just make it worse. Very good. So who's the Fisher of the Soviet Navy? They need a Fisher. The closest they ever got was Gorshkov. That's the closest they ever got. Gone cunt. Do both the front and the back launch turrets into orbit when hit? Honestly, these vessels are not. These vessels you don't want to take a pounding in, but they will. They do have better armor in some places than actually about the tanks do. The gunboats were poorly employed at first. They were poorly employed at first. Thankful for the sort of Germans, because these things could have caused severe trouble. Awesome. Germans must have put torpedo launchers on their panzers. The Germans actually, these things, when they turn up, the Germans find them, as I said, really difficult to deal with. And, the Soviets have things which are even bigger. They have the 16-knot second-class gunboats, which they built between 1910 and 1925. And some of them are still around in World War II. And they were armed with 5 130mm cannon and 8 37mm AA guns. I think. 5? Yes. Yeah, 5 130mm cannon is what they're listed as being armed with. Then you had the Riverine monitors, which were armed with which were capable of 13 knots, but were armed with 2 130mm cannon, 4 45mm, 6 12.7mm guns, weighed 385 tons in standard, and their arm was up to 35mm all over. And those things were scary. Their actual dimensions are 51 meters by 8.2 meters, so 51 meters long, 8.2 meters wide, and 0.8 meters deep in terms of the hull. It is a good looking stamp. Both the pictures I used were from stamps. The Soviets build a lot of very... oh good lord. You see, this is the trouble. Every time I look through this list of Soviet light vessels, I get reminded of vessels which I've managed to block out of my brain. Now, I would say that you could actually, up until recently, find BK-1125 class at Kiev, with all its turrets and everything on display. I'm not sure if it's still there. There's also one in Pinsk. And there are various ones almost surviving around the world. They are good vessels. But, yeah. They are definitely Soviet produced. And now we're on to the American ones. These are gunboats which served them in World War World War II, I mean. Please, World War II. So, the Americans have this idea. And it's a really big brain thinking idea. Pardon me. Really, really big brain idea. The idea is, we need a gunboat to support our motor torpedo boats like the British have the dog boats for. Oh, good lord. Our poor PT boats are suffering. They've got no... They need someone to provide them with fire support. They need something to provide them with fire support. So, what we're going to do is we're going to turn to a vessel the right size and pick that and modify that. And they turn into their submarine chasers. Here is a small problem. Okay? The PT boat. That wonderful vessel which the US Navy operates on has roughly a speed of, even fully loaded, can push up to 45-50 knots. So think about that when I tell you the stats of the submarine chaser. So the SC-497 submarine chasers, 497s, they were 98 tons displacement. Okay, not bad. Could complement of 3 officers and 25 enlisted, 28 personnel. Okay. 2 shafts. All right. Top speed of 21 or possibly 15.6 knots, depending on which engines they carried, because they could carry the 1,540 horsepower General Motors 16184As, or the 880 horsepower 8268 two-stroke engines. You're noticing a small problem here. So its top speed can either be 21 or 15.6 knots. And the vessel it's supposed to be supporting can go 45 to 50 knots. Okay, big brain. Okay, look, this is not the final version. This is just the submarine chaser it's based on. So I'm sure when they made the PG-1M class motor gunboat, that's going to support them. They gave him a 3-inch dual-purpose gun. Okay, that's fine. We're starting off there. It's a 76mm. That's good. Let's be honest, the 6-pounders are 57mm, so 76mm, step in the right direction. A 40mm gun. That's good. That's good. 4 twin 50 cal machine guns. Great. A 60mm mortar. Interesting. This is getting good. This is sounding good. 95 tons. Okay. Oh. 2 1,540 brake horsepower electromotive core 16 diesel engines. 2 shafts. Top speed 21 knots. $21. $21 knots. I'm sorry. There's a dog boat which would like to say hello and go. What exactly have you done to my name and my brand as a gunboat? I've established this brand of a gunboat, which is always there when the torpedo boats need me. Yes, I can't go to full 40, 45 knots, but I can do 29 knots. And most of the motor torpedo boats I'm supporting can do 34 knots. So, 30, 34 knots. So, I can keep up with them. Not that badly. It doesn't need to do 40 knots, 40, 45, 45, 50 knots. Because the torpedo boats have to dash in closer and dash away to also launch their torpedoes accurately and be pointing towards the enemy. All these things are important for them to dash in, dash out. But this is supposed to provide fire support for them, so it needs to be able to keep up with them. That ain't going to happen. You sort of look at them and go, what happened to you? What happened to you? You had so much promise. Did they... This book even has about the radar systems fitted in him and all the other things fitted into the British Coastal Forces. And I'm looking at the US Navy Subchaser 497. And they build a lot of them, and they are very good for what they're supposed to do, which is chase submarines. But who in their right mind thought, yes, let's change the guns around, let's give it more firepower, and let's not give them any more power? There's just no power left in this vessel. And please note, Fairmile do produce Type F, Type H. They don't stop with the Fairmile D. They do produce more than that. But what I find interesting is half the engines the British are using come from America. The Americans have powerful engines they can draw on. And this is why they do start converting PT boats into basically gunboats. What gets worse is you have this. The PG M9 class, right? So the PG-1s have failed because they're too slow to keep up. PG-9s, they're based on the 461 submarine chaser, okay? Which is, the space is 450 tons. Also has two 1,440 brake horsepower diesel engines, and has a top speed of 20.2 knots or 3,000 nautical miles at 12 knots and a crew of 65. Let's see, what do we think the performance figures are for the PGM-9? Anyone want to hazard a guess what the performance figures for the PGM-9 class are? They are also capable of doing 20.2 knots. Which means, yes, they are slower than the PG-1s were. They have a 3-inch 50 dual-purpose gun, one twin 40mm gun, 6 20mm guns, two 50 cal machine guns, and a rocket launcher. They are firepower personified, and they end up being shifted to supporting minesweeping instead of supporting torpedo boats because they're just too slow. And by the way, for those wondering what happens to American patrol ships post-World War, then comes the PGM-39 class. Now, the PGM-39s are built between 1959 and 1970. They complete 59 of them. Their top speed is 17 knots. So you start off with a 21 knot vessel, which is too slow. Then you go down to a 20.2 knot vessel, which is too slow. And then post-World War II, you go to a 17 knot vessel, which is too frigging slow. Okay, I realise I am quite a passionate historian. I realise I am. But I also am one of those people who likes to think that you think about the people you are sending into harm's way. If you are going to send people to face an enemy, the least you can do is equip them with a properly capable system. It doesn't have to be the best, very best thing you can build, because let's be honest, dog boats were not the very best thing the British could build. That was probably a tribal class destroyer. My personal bias showing there. There are lots of vessels which are better than a dog boat, but it is capable of doing its job and it's capable of getting them out. And every single one of the dog boats has almost 10 knots on every single type of PGM of the USN's PGM. And the thing is, imagine if you had a vessel this size which was decently quick and capable to keep up with the PT boats. Imagine what they could have done. Imagine how much more capable the PT boats could have been. Imagine how more viable these vessels could be. No, Donrick Hammer. If even the Soviet Union with their tank gunboats are outpacing your vessels you're choosing for gunboats, you've got a problem there. And you have. No worries, nice to go through one. But it's...
let's put it this way. If I was looking at the top of this vessel, I'd be looking at going, oh, that's going to be quick. Just the pictures, it looks quick. It's got a quick-shaped hull. It needs power! And this is from America. The two things you never usually associate saying with American ships is they don't have enough power and they don't have enough guns. These actually have enough guns. They don't have enough power. They are the country of the 6 cylinders aren't enough, give me 8. They are the country of NASCAR, which is entirely about how much power can you fit in a small frame and make go fast. Okay, it's not that small a frame. They're often quite decent-sized cars, but still, it's relatively small compared to some of the other things you see built in around, of drag racing, all sorts of things, and yet they don't. But there are literally and they have a crew of 65 they have a crew of. It's just no. It's just no. Why would you do this to yourself? Why? Why would you do this to a crew of 65? 65 people aboard. You're already sending 65 people. You tell me you can't use 65 people to maintain some decent engines?
Yeah, and then we have the Asheville class, which have a top speed of 16 knots on diesels and 42 knots when they turn on the turbines. And suddenly you have something which is fast. Built for the Cuban Missile Crisis. They are cool. But the ones before them are just so slow. It's almost like the moment the designers heard gunboat, they thought, Yangtze River, it's got to be slow to go up rivers. We can't go too fast, this is going to have to do rivers. Not thinking, this is going to be a ocean gunboat. It's going to be operating with PT boats, which go at 40, 45 knots in the speed attack run. So it's got to keep pace with them. It can't drop too far behind. Jack Ray, rednecks were not involved in making of these boats. No, get the rednecks out and have them involved in the making of these boats. Anyone who, basically, what they needed was the person involved in their designing. I have decided this. As you know, I am not a drinker. I do not drink alcohol. But, in my experience, knowing 3 of them, who are all various forms of engineer, or mechanical engineer, of the Southern American persuasion, definitely would describe themselves. Well, 2 would describe themselves as a redneck. 1 would describe himself as a hillbilly. Yeah, she would describe herself as a hillbilly. I know from experience that what you get is their light beer of choice, not the heavy stuff, just the light beer of choice. The thing you have for casual afternoon drinking. You have them drinking that, and within 5 minutes, whatever design you're working on will have more power than it's ever going to need. Because they will, at the moment that they get lubricated, like I do with Iron Brew, the moment they get that source of lubrication, they will figure out a way to fit not 1 8-cylinder engine in there, but 2, 3, or 4. With the space of this vessel, I am sure they could fit in more. Run. Should they have gotten RN's Captain Hamilton to figure out how to get more power? I think he would have probably found the engineers involved and possibly started hurting them. Richards, my uncle drinks light beer so he can drink more. But where to put the rocking chairs? Again, they will always find a space for a rocking chair. I kid you not, the one who describes themselves as a hillbilly, who I've worked with for a couple of years, and is a very, very good engineer, has actually submitted sketches for an assignment where they used what they called the rocking chair scale. So they were designing an airliner, and they designed it so that every seat had space to be a safety rocking seat for an airliner. So everyone could in comfort have a rocking seat. I think even the pilot seats were rocking seats. As anyone knows, boats can only go max speeds on a tall. This is adjusting speed if physically possible. Actually, this is going to sound strange, but here's the thing. If this is able to cruise at 20 knots, and it's going on 20 knots, but its cruising speed is 12 knots, right? If you have a 40, 45 knot max speed vessel, its cruising speed is not going to be 12 knots. And even more importantly, when it's in the attack run, it's going to go up to maximum speed. So the problem is it goes into maximum speed and dashes off. What's this going to do? The gunboat is supposed to provide protection for it going in, and then when it goes off, it can't keep up. And then it's caught. And then you've got the scenario where the torpedo boats, instead of getting out of there, are having to stay behind to cover the gunboat, which is supposed to be protecting them. So that's the problem. It's not a case of you can adjust the speed. That yes, you can. Ships don't have to go at max speed at all times. But your maximum speed is going to make a big effect on your operational capability when you're operating with torpedo boats. Yeah, the rocking chair scale, oh my. Yeah. If I remember correctly, they got a first for that paper overall. I'm surprised. I was actually surprised looking at more airliners do not have a rocking chair seats. They look comfortable. Was this from the same group of geniuses that made all the guns version of the B-17 that couldn't keep up the bombers? Probably different sets of geniuses, but similar philosophy. So I'm going to be about to see why I'm bothered with 8-cylinder engines. Back then, multiple makers had 12-cylinder engines. Also, the Viper had 10. Go for it. Lions, all I'm saying is that you know it's bad when a World War I battleship can catch you. In the nicest way, there are World War I battleships which can outpace them. Because remember, they are 20.2 knots, right? And then the ones often go down even lower. So 20.2 knots for the 20.2 knots. These could be outpaced by HMS Dreadnought. Think about that. 1905 HMS Dreadnought battleship can outpace your motor to gunboat. And then remember that your torpedo boats, which are having to retreat from an area fast to avoid being caught by the enemy, are going to have to slow down to work with it. If you make light raiding attacks and your gunboats are there to support the submerged torpedo boats, they need to be able to keep up with the torpedo boats for when they're doing their entry, engagement, and extraction maneuvers. That's the whole point and advantage of the Fairmile D, because it's designed to be able to be a gunboat as well as a torpedo boat, and so they have very similar operating characteristics, which means the gunboats come in and can get out at the same time. No one's holding anyone up. Sean Quigley, think the designers... No, that wasn't what the designers were told. I've read what the designers were told. May have been told to make something to escort the PTs near the attack point, but not actually cover them in attack. Kind of increase the air defense in transit. That's not what they were told at all. And honestly, again, the PGM-9 is not really the great thing for air defense. It's got a twin 40mm and a 3-inch 50 dual purpose and 6 20mm guns. But no. And the fact is, the US Navy themselves say they were... The PGM... they were too slow to keep up and were shifted to support minesweeping roles. So they were shifted to covering minesweeping ships instead of carrying out this previous duty because they were too slow. The US Navy's own people, own rules, rule them as too slow because they can't do the job they're supposed to do. Mark Hunt as well. Higgins did say Navy didn't know anything about building small craft. Yeah, and I think Higgins was right. I can see where you're coming from, Sean. You're a perfectly sensible idea. And that would be something which I would consider them, but that wasn't actually what they were designed for. And that's the reason why they're basically not built. As in Quad 3, I saw the area class and earlier gunboats playing for design interest in terms of speed. Potentially the Bureau of Ships hears the phrase gunboat and automatically thinks slow riverine craft. But I think it's also a thing of they're selecting their ship. Again, think about it. The British... It's going to sound strange. What are the British doing? The British are going into their torpedo boat construction ones and seeing who's building the best, biggest torpedo boat they can use and going, yeah, let's go with that. Or, and let's be honest, the steam gunboats. This would have been a perfect design to go and back up those PT boats. Okay, you might want to extend its range a bit, but it would have been perfect to keep up with them. 35 knots, that's fine. It's not going to hold them back much. But the US Navy just doesn't have good choices going for it. Jack Ryan, perfect match would be those slow boats and some Mark 14 torpedoes. Well, yeah. But then we come to the summary. And, of course, there's an insect class sitting there. In peacetime, gunboats are the equivalents of modern-day helicopters. They are a way of projecting power inshore, often inland, thanks to rivers and other channels. In wartime, they provide fire support for amphibious operations for torpedo boats, mine-laying, and mine-sweeping. They provide for a myriad of small but necessary functions that are easy to overlook but very difficult to do without. They matter. Gunboats are useful. They are basic, they are simple, but they are useful. It's the sad thing, actually. If we look at the gunboats which the US Navy produces in World War II, those two classes I've just looked at, they would have actually been excellent for going up and down the rivers. They would have been fine for that duty. Really useful. Conversely, they weren't fine for the duty they were designed for. And that's a problem, because if we think about how the British end up using them at the Fairmaldese, they're there at D-Day, they're there in all sorts of operations, commando raids, etc. The gunboats are going in. They're providing close support to commandos. They're providing support at D-Day. They are doing all sorts of random operations around the world. In the Mediterranean, they get everywhere. There is not a single theatre of war that Fairmiles do not show up in and go, hello? Sean Quigley, Dr. C and everyone else, thanks for the input. I was kind of just trying to come up with some semi-sensible reason they would be so slow. They really mucked up this design. How much HP would be needed? Looking at the PGM-9s, they have 2,880 brake horsepower.
or 1070 kilowatts. If we consider to get to 35 knots, the steam gunboats had 8,000 horsepower. The dog boats, the Fairmaldies, they weigh... Actually, let's see. The PG9s weigh in at 450 tons. I'm trying to think to get something with 450 tons or 450 tons up to a decent speed. The Fairmaldies are 104 tons, and they have 4 Packard petrol engines, which give them 5,000, a total of 5,000 horsepower. And that gets them up to 29 knots. The steam turbines in the steam gunboat give them 8,000 horsepower, but the steam gunboats are not that heavy, if I remember correctly. SGBs are 255 tons in deep load. So this is the thing, they're bigger and heavier than the steam gunboats. They are a full 75%. Each of those PGM-9s displace as much as almost 2 of those, because they're 175 tons in standard, 255 tons in deep load. So this thing displaces 450 tons? Almost as much as 2? Oh, fudge. You're probably talking about needing 16,000 plus horsepower. And 16,000 plus shaft horsepower. So I would actually, I'd start with getting 8,000 shaft horsepower and see how much that improved things. Because if you had 4 decent 2,000 horsepower engines, that should get you motoring along at a decent pace. Even just 4 engines and 4 shafts could actually improve your capabilities with them. You know, because they have 2 1,440 diesel engines. So, yeah, get yourself double your engines, double your shafts. You might have some sort of advantage come that. It's Sean. It's one of those interesting questions to get on. How do you fix the PGM 9s and PGM 1s? And it's basically they need more power. They need more power, and it's how you're going to go about getting it, and how much power do you need to get in them. Honestly, if I was the USN. If I was the USN, horsepower, by the way, Fushi Smith, I've answered that question in a couple of other previous videos, including one on engineering stats and horsepower. So if you search for that, you should find it. But yeah, it's working out how to actually fix them. Honestly, they'd almost be better going to... Well, they wanted a steel vessel design, obviously, because they chose the sub-chaser, so they've chosen something heavier. So it's almost a case of take the steam gunboat design from the British, make it slightly larger, and then fit in a lot of very big diesel engines.
Um, da, 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 da. If we consider there are, what can I do? What should I do? You know, what are they? How big are their engines? I'm looking to see what the biggest diesel engines the US could possibly build this time, and they have a lot of them. There are a lot of very powerful diesel engines under production in America at this point. Mostly for trains. They have two-stroke diesels, which is just weird. Weird. The whole thing is honestly the whole design of these things is weird. There are so many things which you just sit there and go, why? And yes, I know they decided to convert sub-chasers while on the stocks as they were being constructed. But again, you are selecting sub-chasers. Why are you selecting sub-chasers? Which Bright Spark for? And again, you're selecting sub-chasers for conversion in 1941 when you're when you're having trouble dealing with submarines as a threat. It's all wrong. So, that's basically the conclusion. It is now 10 o'clock. I hope you enjoyed. I'm going to do final questions, and then I'm going to... Well, actually, what I'm going to do before I do final questions, I'm going to go to Patreon, and I'm going to give you an update because I gave you an update. Well, you should have had an update yesterday in the comment response video on the votes which are coming in for February. So, get rid of this and add in desktop capture, and I want the patron vote. Move that across to there. And let's see what we got. Well, who's in the lead? Michael66. If Tsingtao incident leads to war, how does the 1939 RN carrier force fare against the 1939 IJN force? 19 votes. On 16 votes, in second place, Martin Peacock, the Queen Elizabeth class. A brave first step, a faltering John Leaf, or something else. Possibly a successful failure. Then on 12 votes, No. We're on 15 votes. Coming up fast is Paul Thompson's The Attack on Copenhagen in 1801 and following operations in Danish waters until the fall of Napoleon. And by the way, by my calculations, there are many votes left to be cast because, remember, you can vote for as many as you like as a patron. Then on 12 votes, we have Colin Cameron's HMS Vanguard sinks Arrow Vincent de Meer, 1982. How does it affect US and Soviet naval development, if at all? We also have Jack Ray's History of Stanflex and why the US doesn't use it. Then 11 votes, we have Wayne Borean's Agincourt, as proposed by Alex, is built, but how do other navies react? We have also Glyn Stewart's Orion drive is actually developed in the 70s. How does that develop? What does the 1975 10,000-ton space battleship look like for USA and Russia? 10 votes. We have Andronor. How World War II Germany put to use vessels they captured from occupied nations. Do we have 9? We do have a 9, which is Danny Wright's Italian forces and infrastructure in the Red Sea in 1940. On 8, we have Robert Locke, HMS Fidelity, a mystery wrapped in Enigma, wrapped in a French merchantman, SOE, ship and commando carrier. Paul Thompson's. In what way did the Danish Navy World War I convince Germany not to attack Denmark, if at all? On 7 votes, we have Paul Thompson's The Danish Navy World War II. How useful could the Danish Navy have been to the Germans if taken completely? Michael 66, the 50-gun ship of the line. It's a 4th, maybe a 5th-rate story. Which I thought would be quite popular with that naming. It's a 4th, maybe a 5th-rate story. I thought that will make it popular. As I said, I couldn't really pick out what was going to win this week. This month. It was really sort of interesting. Wayne Borean, a reincarnated Jackie Fisher, takes over the Royal Navy in the 1930s. Oh God, sloops and torpedo boats would have been built. Sloops and torpedo boats. Oh, that man would have had sloops and torpedo boats. He'd have looked at the treaty and gone, what can I build without any limitations? Oh, I will build it. And by the way, magically, when war began, those sloops would all find they could go faster than 20 knots. Be amazing. Karl Gasberg, Diesel Kriegsmarine, on 7, coming up. And Runon, Stalin gets most or all of his dream fleet. What would the likely NATO Western Ally building program look like in response? Also 7 votes. Then we have down on 6 votes, we have Michael 66. What were IJ and infrastructure bottlenecks if you'd been Minister in the 1930s? How would you fix them? And on 5 votes, British naval infrastructure, its development over time. And on 4 votes, in last place, we have Karl von Gasberg's Flotillas of the Danube, through sieges of Belgrade in 1456 and 1915, 6th to 9th of October, and possible future. There you go. Apparently I'm offering an exclusive sticker. Cute. And yes, I do have tiers here. Goodness gracious me, I have a lot of tiers. But every time it's ever prompted me to make a new tier, I've just created one for the hell of it. And I have to admit, I did create this tier just for the renowned patron tier. I literally created it for this sole purpose. I don't think anyone is a renowned patron. I haven't checked. I literally created it for the sole purpose of seeing how much merch I could pack into any tier. And for that, I needed to put it to a certain price. So I do admit that that entire tier is not created because I ever thought anyone would do it, but literally because I wanted to see just how much merch I could pack into a tier. And then we have Hooded Patron, Renowned Patron, Chief Patron, Leading Patron, and Patron. I kept it fine. Standard. And then I thought, oh yeah, HMS Hooded Patron. And then HMS Renowned is my favourite battlecruiser, so, and there's her image there, so Renowned Patron. You know, it's fun. But yeah. Plymouth 557 notes. 2-stroke diesels are cool. Torque machines. Yeah, but they're not exactly going to give you a lot of power if you're a ship. Ambition. Off topic. Well, let's put it this way. 2-stroke diesels are very useful if you want to have operate as a vessel in terms of a merchant vessel, a constant speed operator. Once you're looking for higher speed of operation, you probably want more than a 2-stroke engine. You can vote for as many as you like. Only patrons can vote, but yes, you can vote for as many as you like. That's the point. The reason is it's the top 2. Okay? So my view has always been, okay, if someone turns up and votes for all of them, well, that's kind of pointless, but that cancels themselves out. If someone turns up and votes for, let's say there's 15 options, and they vote for 6 of them, then if the odds are, at a certain point, you're going to get, something you like is probably going to get produced. Because basically it works by, you all make, patrons make suggestions of topics, and then I turn those into questions I can do. and then I put them to you to vote. So it's basically, these are topics which are suggested by patrons, and then they're voted for by the patrons, and then they're given as a live and a long patrol. So they turn into 4 videos. Don't recount. Yeah. Okay, let's just make sure I don't miss any questions. Thanks, Jack Ray. It's very kind of you. And Bichon. Off-top question. If the US won't send F-16s to Ukraine, wouldn't the Northrop A-38 Talons be good, less extra substitute? Trained turned light fighter as opposed to a full-on fighter jet. It's not... Let's put it this way. My view is this, and the thing that's not being talked about is how difficult it is to set up the infrastructure in Ukraine to support F-16s. Because people often treat it as you're just turning up with aircraft and then you can fly. But you've got to, not just train the fitters, not just train the aircraft, you've got to put the facilities in which support those aircraft. You've got to give the bombs, give all the systems which they need to work with them. Because a bomb isn't a bomb isn't a bomb. You need bombs which talk to the systems on board, especially for the advanced targeting which they can do. You need systems which can allow you to calibrate the radars, the sensors, check all the equipment, check the engines. So you're talking about a lot of infrastructure which needs to be put in place at an airbase inside Ukraine for them to operate. Because otherwise they need to fly from a NATO country using a NATO airbase, a NATO country's airbase, which is not going to be a good look and would actually widen them, or probably widen the war, because it would be a legitimate target for the Russians to attack. So there are lots of problems. You can't just send aircraft. This is the same problem we ran into in World War II, when it was found that whilst within their area of reach, heavy bombers are great, they can go and pummel a target, as long as it's not moving. Actually moving a squadron of heavy bombers from point A to point B to operate is a frigating nightmare. And it's still the same with F-16s, all the modern aircraft, it's still the same. So I think that's the reason why we're not giving F-16s or anything to Ukraine. It's literally the sheer amount of infrastructure that would have to be set up to support it. Cody, the answer is that Admiral King wasn't able to go chew on designers of these things at the time. He's too busy chewing on other things. Nice ignorance. So between a 4 or 5 twin 8-inch Surrey subclass county, if they had been built, which would have been chosen? Oh, honestly, there is a view of a Surrey class county. There was a design I once saw which had 4 triple turrets. So I don't think they'd have gone for 5 twin, because I don't think they were going to go for a 5 turret configuration. But a 4 twin or a 4 triple, possibly. Or maybe 2 triples and 2 twins. 10-gun configuration. Probably in the sensible way, the triple twin, rather than the twin triple like the Americans. Thunder comment, you mentioned a research trip in one of your recent videos to Norway following troubles. Mostly Narvik, looking for the lost bows? Narvik, and a few other places. I want to go where basically the tribals went in Norway. And so that means going up and down quite a lot of Norway and seeing a fair amount of interesting operations, because it wasn't just Narvik. They took part in they took part in Claymore, they took part in Ossingford. They did all sorts of little operations. So yeah. Probably the central fronted area as well. Hooded patron should get a hoodie. I think a hooded patron does get a hoodie. If I remember correctly, let's see. The leading patron gets something. The hooded patron gets, I think they get a hoodie. Let me check, because there seems to be something going wrong here. The hoodie appears to have just gone... For some reason, the hoodie's for the leading patron, but not for the chief patron or the hooded patron. Or... Well, they get the exclusive long sleeve shirt with renown on, so... they get that. I will check through them. But there are... Sometimes... Don't take this the wrong way, patron does sort of reorganize things and then tell me afterwards, and then I have to go back and reorganize them. Excellent. Yeah, maybe round here is if I win the Euro Millions, but then I can hire Dr. Clarke's history guide to me full time without the teaching and tell him to find Agincourt. No daring patron. Not a moment, no. Next will be tribal patron. Oh, good lord. If I end up having to do a patron... If people actually end up doing the renowned patron and I get a reminder from patron that I need to have a higher tier, that I will probably end up doing a tribal or a daring patron or something like that. It'll depend. It might be a vampire patron of the HMS Vampire with a picture of her. Sean Quigley, thinking a diesel-electric power plant like the subs had may work to give the PGMs the needed speed as they work to a much heavier vessel to 21 or so knots, so also relatively complex. Sounds sensible to me. Thanks, Paul Amos. Thank you, Baron Newman. Thank you, Burroughts. Thank you, Steve Clarke. Nice one. Would you agree putting 2 box missile launchers at the stern with a 6-inch front gun in front is not sensible? Depends on the scenario and where it is. And where you're pointing the box missile launchers. If they're pointed out to port and starboard, and you've got the gun in front of them, then it's probably not going to cause any problems. Yardville, even ruling out all spares acts, just getting dumb bombs and missiles to feed these aircraft will be a logistical nightmare. Yep. Vision, the US needs to keep hoovering up Soviet aircraft and donate it to Ukraine. Do understand the logistics issue being overlooked a bit in media, but though most reports on tanks highlight the issue. Well, actually, it's easier to support tanks than his aircraft. That's the scary thing. It is easier to support tanks than his aircraft. A lot easier. Mainly because aircraft have this thing they do called flying, where if they have a problem, they tend to have an urgent desire to do something called crashing. Whereas tanks, if they have a problem, tend to just break down. And they're sitting there on the ground, and then you send your recovery vehicles, pick them up, take them home, and go, what's wrong with you? Right. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Hope you enjoyed. And take care. Thank you, Paul Newman. Thank you, Carmen Gesberg, Blavatsky, John Sykes, Descari, Steve Clarke, Knights of everyone, Yardville, Colin Cameron, Dunrick Ironhammer, Bijon, Sean Quigley, Carmen Gesberg, Brad S, Albazaski. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dan Freeman, Jack Ray, and I think there was another admin here at one point who were adminning. Paul from Chicago, I'm fairly sure he was here at one point. And yeah, thank you, Paul from Chicago. Thank you, all the admins, for adminning. And thank you, Gordon Collins, Ingenious Iron, Dick Richards, Ethan. Thank you, everyone. Hope you enjoyed it. Take care. Then, like chieftain tanks, designed to break down in technically useful places in Germany near their bases. Okay, I will once again tell you the story of the chieftain tanks. There were 3 units deployed in Germany at one point. And one had a sergeant major who was absolutely obsessed with maintenance. And the other 2 had sergeant majors who were quite obsessed with maintenance, but not quite as obsessed as the first sergeant major. What it was found with the chieftains was if you did sensible maintenance, if you kept doing over maintenance, kind of like the Navy does on most of their ships, then you found the scenario very quickly developing where the ships, they were actually better performing. Their vehicles were tended to work. Because the whole thing was it was maintaining the linkages between the wheels and the very much their own their suspension system, which was actually quite an advanced suspension for the chieftains, as their engines. So you could keep the linkage between the wheels and the engines working so they could keep the power. They was fine, because that was the main source of breakdowns, apparently. Admittedly, this was told to me by the sergeant major in question, but we'll leave that to one side. Take care, everyone. Thank you for watching, and hope you enjoyed. Thank you, Just Funk, and Joe Quigley. Thank you.